Heiner, guten Abend. You're a floating head today.
I don't get it. What does it mean, floating head?
In other words, I don't see your body.
Oh, yes.
Just a head.
Well, it's black. And
Yes.
the background is black. And then it's very, very clear that it's only my face is visual. And even if I take the black thing away, you see, that is okay. But if I have a black sweater, it's all gone.
Yep.
I'm playing a little bit with backgrounds. How about you?
Yeah, I've done it. It's not very exciting. I like reality.
I know. For me, it is just for sharing certain issues.
Is that a particular design in the background that has meaning? Is that a earth, green earth, kind of a blue earth theme?
Yes, it's the Earth mandala.
Okay.
With the as the spectrum, as you see it written, Earth mandala.
It's not very clear from here.
I know, that is the problem. That's why I'm playing with things like this. You like it?
There, the titles are more readable, legible. Friede, peace, canon, scanon.
Yes. About 160 languages, what we found in Iraq and with the North American Indians, that there's not an opposite between war and peace. And it's a very, very broad spectrum in between. So you see, if I'm in certain environments, I select certain backgrounds or messages.
Mm-hmm.
And I find it boring that everybody takes the earth like this. Everybody is doing that.
It's not visible now, Heiner.
It's not yet.
Yeah.
I wonder why. No?
No, I'm only seeing your portrait, very small, very, very small avatar portrait.
Okay, no, then you see, I was speaking about this. Everybody is using this background. It became quite fashionable to consider yourself to be in orbit and being an astronaut. So you see, I was just playing with the difference of being close to the scene and going back.
Yeah.
Because the Zoom software doesn't work so much in certain backgrounds with certain colors that you are how behind the scene. And I still wonder what the algorithms are about this to make this change.
Yeah, see,
anyway,
my face becomes transparent when I do this.
Yes. You see here you see me with my Buddha and my elephant. And we have Barry on deck, so we can finish all this picture showing.
Well, Heiner, are you all again on your way to something else, or are you here for the duration today?
It depends what you mean by duration.
until Barry finishes speaking.
We haven't had overtime for a couple of sessions, I think now, have we?
Oh, Barry, I'm all ears when you talk, but I don't want anyone to interrupt you.
Well, that means we have to have a private conversation, depending on who else is here.
So what is the schedule? You are presenting something, Barry?
I don't think so. Am I supposed to present something? I mean, I could, if you wanted me to, I could make something up, but I don't think I was on schedule to do that, was I?
No, I mean, about a month ago, I had asked whether people want to go back to deep dives or magic roundtables, twice a month, and I would take the other 2 times a month. I've got no takers so far, so no one has stepped forward.
Actually, I posted an open question just a few minutes ago, which may or may not be suitable, but I'll just, since I can't memorize my own writing, so where did I write it? Let's see.
While you're looking for that, I also came with about 4 or 5 questions of my own that I've gathered throughout the week. So after our check-ins, we can consider whether any of those are interesting enough to keep Heiner around.
Yeah. Actually, I'll put mine in the chat so I don't have to recite them and stumble over reading my own writing.
I think I saw it was the one about reliable
You did.
information.
You and Joel, I think, just saw it.
Yeah.
I'll just post it here.
CIA matters. Trying to enlist the CIA.
Who's got their radio going or something?
Wasn't
CIA is surveilling us.
It was only Mr. Nixon.
So there's in the chat is what I just came up with as a generic thing to ponder, not necessarily answer, just ponder and think about answering it, unless you already know the answer or an answer.
I know
You can
a
also-
response.
And you can also invert it and say least reliable, or least trustworthy. So it's sort of the two extremes, you know, who's the go-to and who's the not to go-to source.
Well, we can consider that, but anybody opt for checking in? We're barely 3 minutes into this thing right now.
Well, I have a lot of notes and a lot of ideas for today, so it's not exactly a check-in, but maybe I'll do it after the check-ins.
So one of the things that I was considering, this is a meta comment, is a check-in, from what I've heard, is supposed to allow one to arrive, to be present, to listen, to, you know, sort of rid oneself of distractions before getting into the meat of the conversation, right? And so that's why I refrain from, you know, opening up with these 5 or 6 questions that I have. And it's clear that you've given some thought. So I'm just wondering whether now, 3.5 years in, whether we still need check-ins or whether we should just dive right in. I'm okay either way, actually. We seem, the 4 of us at least, you know, seem to know each other well enough that, hey, if I need to say something to explain to you, you know, why I'm a bigger asshole today than usual, you know, I'll do it, you know? I don't necessarily need to say, okay, I will check in now and tell you guys why I'm an asshole, okay? So.
You have to say,
We
well,
can
somebody
dispense
wrote me a
with the
bigger one this week.
You haven't seen me angry yet, okay?
Well, here's the question. When you've seen me raise my voice, could you tell whether or not I was angry or not?
You clearly seemed angry, yes. Most people would call that anger. Yes.
I have seen it, I think.
Yeah.
If not
if I
often.
were to raise my voice and say, and I think you know this word, Abunai.
You've posted that word a couple days ago as well.
Yeah, it's actually Japanese. Do you recognize Japanese?
I do not speak Japanese, although my parents are quite fluent in it, but I never picked it up.
Abunai just means in English, look out, danger, look out.
Look out.
Is that said in anger?
No, but when you were loud, that was not what you were saying. That was not the instance that I was recalling.
That's correct. I was not saying danger, look out. I just want to point
You
out
were saying something else.
Well, I think when you raise your voice, you either do it out of anger or out of emotion, or to alert someone, to warn someone.
Yes.
I gave my first son the first name Core. Core is a name I can cry very out, and maybe he hears it 2 miles from here if I'm very loud. So being loud is not the same like writing with capital letters. It always depends on the situation.
So as a heuristic, that's how I choose names for my dogs too, Heiner. I can
Zeus,
yell them across an open, empty field and the dog will still hear me.
you have Zeus and Angel, right? And then, are Zeus and Angel your first dogs who are no longer with you?
No, I actually, before them, I had a dog named Oberon, and I used to call him Obi.
So like the
Obi,
school Oberon?
the school Oberon?
Isn't
No,
there
like
a
Midsummer
universal-
Night's comedy Oberon.
Oh, okay. I'm thinking it's the name of a university, but maybe I'm misremembering.
No, I think you're talking about Oberlin.
Oberlin, yeah. Yeah,
That is
Oberon
not
and
Oberlin.
Oberlin, right. I'm mixing up the two, correct.
Okay. Anyway, Obi was my introduction to golden retrievers, and that's what made me love golden retrievers the rest of my life.
I love them because they're a fabulous source of oxytocin.
Exactly. Exactly.
Remember this other way to get oxytocin that Gertrude taught us? Maybe you weren't there. She taught us that you can do this gesture and you can actually self-produce an oxytocin rush,
Oh,
which I never realized, but it worked. At least for me, it works. I don't know if it works for everybody.
maybe I'll try.
I can get a warm fuzzy just doing that.
Maybe we could make that a topic of one of these discussions, how to get oxytocin.
Besides having golden retriever in your lap, belly up.
Right.
Big golden retriever belly up.
Okay, anybody else want to opt in for a check-in, or shall we just dispense with that and go immediately toward collecting ideas to talk about? I'll give it
If anybody wants to
4
check in, they
seconds.
can.
What? What
I
was that?
say if anybody wants to check in, let them have the show for a second.
That's why I'm allowing a moment for people to opt in.
Well, I'll do a short check-in if I've got time.
Go, Alex.
It's a dog. I had a dog.
Your audio is
Choppy.
Is
scratchy,
it?
and your video is frozen.
I'll check out and I'll rejoin
Okay.
and I'll reinsert my camera too
Okay.
before I do. Okay.
In the meantime, welcome, Kayla. Welcome, Colin.
Kayla, whose real name means free-spirited.
I heard it meant womanly. And then the other definition of Kayla means pure.
Okay.
Why do you laugh?
Kayla's peerless. How can a peerless person be a peer?
That's the
Without
post
peer.
that Joel wrote? Joel wrote a post about the names of all the people in the space.
Yeah, the historical meanings of all our names. Or
I was
etymology.
wondering where he got the one from Colin. But
Oh, I looked it up. It's correct. It's Gaelic.
really,
In fact, that exactly, it's an Irish or Gaelic name. That's really what it means.
let me just say, I hope we don't talk about that post today.
I'm waiting for the horoscopes to follow.
Anyway.
Yeah.
All right. Anyone else? I'll give you guys 3 seconds to check in. Otherwise, I'm going to lay out 5 or 6 questions that I have collected over the week to see if any of them interest you enough to compel you to say something. Okay. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. Those are 2 extra seconds. Okay. Here's my first question. There seems to be a number of sources that have talked about how to live life, I guess, which to me was kind of like the underlying question of philosophy. But inevitably, the word morality comes up. So I know this is dangerously close to the religion idea, but I was curious whether anyone wanted to lean in on morality and where one, in a sense, adopts any framework or guidance of morality. So that's question number 1, okay? Question number 2 is another one that came about the last couple of weeks with some posts involving, I guess, Benjamin Taylor, Peter Jones, a few others. And that is, and Barry and I had a one-on-one on this week, is I still don't really understand what systems scientists define as systems science. Harry, Heiner, I'm sure you've got some ideas on this one, but I am curious what the adopters in this domain consider the definition and the framework of systems science. So that's question number 2. Question number 3 is one that's more germane to the practice of the information and knowledge that I think we try to co-create. And that is, if someone gives you a new document or a link to something, how do you go about determining whether you actually are interested, whether you actually read it, whether you internalize it, whether it's something you find relevant, whether you choose to respond? How do you do that? Because, in my mind, every day I wake up, there's like 200 posts, on one of these channels that I'm a member of. And I think you guys know which one I mean. So confusion on my part could be taken as lack of interest. On the other hand, it could be taken as, I don't understand what the bleep the context is. So I'm kind of curious how people look at information that's being offered and figure out, okay, is this something I want to lean into, or is this something that I won't lean into at the moment? Okay. So that's question number 3. I have 2 others, but I'm going to stop there just in case any of you guys have feedback on it. And one of mine, by the way, I'll probably just save to the quote unquote post 10 a.m., post 2-hour mark, because it's kind of inflammatory. And I just want to see if anybody wants to stick around for any of that. Okay, so those are my 3 things I just want to toss into the pool of meaning among us here, and see if any of you have any others to toss in, or whether any of those sound interesting.
Yeah, I got a lot, but I don't know if someone else wants first. It might take a couple of minutes.
On the other hand, you're welcome to go ahead, Glenn.
Okay, yeah, well, okay, I'll just jump into it. I think I'll do a screen share because I created a document, but these are based on ideas that we have discussed this week in a few of the messenger threads. And there was an idea, there was a discussion about the role of copy paste and other alternatives. And there was a post about how to handle distractions. Well, there were several big topics. Okay, I think I'll just do the screen share, actually. Okay. Yeah, you can see it. So basically, what I was thinking about was whether we could have a model for collective intelligence and for co-creation that's based on what we're doing here and similar places. Documents, I wrote quite a different things about the situation, the context, about what could be considered the purpose of something like GCC. So we could see it as a kind of a prototype for a multi-purpose community, which could become a super community, and in a more limited sense, a generative conversation arena where we can highlight various globally oriented ideas and projects. And then, of course, there's the specific purposes of the communication process. Let's see that I have a little typo there. Yeah, doesn't matter. So this is sort of different purposes that you can say follows from the communication process. And what I think we want to achieve is a flow of co-creation, which follows naturally from a good conversational process, where the conversation creates content, and the great conversations hopefully create great content that can then later be copied, stored, reshaped, refined, reshared, and evolved further, and then flow into some kind of repository, of which we have several. And then you can consider this in a larger context with a concept of mind pool, where you have the global mind pool of all ideas in our culture, the internet as a whole. Within that, we have a smaller mind pool of the results of everything we've gone into, which I would call the GCC repository. And then you have the mind pool of each person, which will be in their own, little repository, and maybe not so little. I looked a little bit at the content that Barry had, for example, and he had an enormous amount of very interesting content. I think all of us here have different things. And then there's some emergent ideas in the space. Superstructures like Viscope, Global Sim, Supersystem, this collective metacognitive machine works, some idea Doug has talked about. I don't know if I'm even saying it the right way, but it seems to me that some of the emergent ideas are these superstructures which have as their characteristic that they can contain all other structures. So you basically have structures that can contain one another, like multi-dimensional structures. And these seem to be an emergent idea that something like that needs to be created. And then related with that is this idea of profiles, identity wallet. Colin speaks about the conversational people adapter. And I think they're very related. It's sort of the personal profile of each person. And Lauren Nignon, I know, has been doing a lot of really good work when it comes to that. And then we have the deep dive conversations, the special events, which we've tried out, which can take many different forms, but it's basically different people can present something they're interested in. And so that's sort of the context. And what I basically wanted to get to was that I had this idea, I think this was really supposed to be at the end, about channels of communication. So that was really the main idea that I wanted to share with you guys, because I was thinking about what could be the most effective channels and this sort of structure for the communication if we want to begin to build more, because that's come up several times. We want to build, and then I've been thinking a lot about that, and I thought, what are sort of the essential channels that are needed if we want to have a good co-creative process? On the one hand, first of all, obviously it's the video space, the meeting space where we are now, the Zoom meetings, they have a very big importance. And then they're archived on YouTube, etc. There's the GCC Facebook group, which I haven't been very active in, but
Hey, Glenn,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt. I was hoping to gather ideas for discussion. Is this an idea for discussion, or is this already kind of an elaboration? Because it's actually been quite lengthy, and there's a lot to soak in. So I'd like to see if
I would say it this way, that the main idea is the one at the end. The others is more sort of the bigger context, but I sometimes like to mention it. But the idea is basically, if we could have a sort of structure where we have a wild space of messenger chat threads. And if we could use those chat threads in a certain way where we could combine it with a repository of core content. So that's sort of the idea that this boils down to, the more specific idea that I wanted to look at, that I think there's a need for a wild space, some kind of dynamic chat space, because what we've experienced until now is that many of the repositories, there hasn't been engagement. There has been engagement in the messenger chat, but there we haven't had structure. So basically the idea is, what if we have that engagement and then we take some of those ideas and transfer them over to the Zoom meetings and transfer them over to the repository as well. So it's basically a transfer of the best items between these channels. So that's the idea that I wanted to mention here in the context of everything else. So yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, thanks, Glenn. So I paraphrased it, maybe incorrectly, but to me, it involves flow of topics, topic flow, and guiding conversations to appropriate channels / repositories.
Yeah, the structure to facilitate a good flow.
Yeah.
The informational structure, you could
Yeah.
say.
Yeah. All right. Anyone else with topics?
Yeah, topic is structure, systemic language, new languages, specialized languages that are dangerous in the wrong context. They're dangerous because they don't get interpreted the same in different groups. So they're specialized languages for specific tasks. But when you have an open source community like this on the internet, and you're trying to attract a lot of people to be involved and take part and show some interest, it's necessary to have a language that's as open and common as possible with the most widespread usage and understanding. So it's something that doesn't change too often. But it is, like the last 10 years, there's been quite a few new words come up on the internet that were new to me when I was growing up. And the links I put in my Links Plus page, I'm creating a web page that I encourage all my friends to do the same thing, because I get up in the morning and see 20 posts on the thread. And I go through them looking for links. The links stand out if they're dynamic links because they're a different color and underlined sometimes. And if I find one I like, I'll look into it and whack it on my Links Plus page so the whole world can see it and share it. I mean, not the whole world, we're going to go there and look, but the AI knows it's going to know it's there. And when they're searching for something related to it, it could show up in the search result. It's just a possibility. And that way information becomes more commonly, more people become aware of it because it's being shared somehow. It's a repository, it's a knowledge. We're getting group knowledge there in a roundabout sort of way. If you do a search of the GCC archives with the word spirituality, it'll come up, you'll get about 60 pages of different links. If you search for covenant or cult, you'll probably get the same result. So we've got a lot of issues. The topic I think I'd like to put in for today is systemic evolution of the processes. This is because when the process is corrupted by outside vested interests that are seeking a different agenda, you get this systemic corruption. Over.
I had trouble following that, Alex. You started with languages and you ended up with evolution of processes.
Yeah, I do that. That's one of my human failings. Starting on one topic and going off on a tangent.
But are you
I
saying that
ended, I ended with the topic systemic corruption.
So it's not process, it's systemic corruption.
well, it's that you want a
Yeah.
process that can withstand corruption, right? That can
Well,
be
the
well
language
being corrupted.
It's closely related to systemic language. If the mafia uses a certain language in their coven, anybody listening in wouldn't understand what they're talking about anyway. So they can have some privacy. And politicians like to do the same thing, and groups of scientists doing research for corporations do the same thing. The FBI do it, the CIA does it. So why not website development groups? They'd be doing it too. Apple and the Chinese, you know, it's just one of those things we've got to live with. Over.
Okay, so your topic is systemic corruption and how to prevent it. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, open round. Which of these sounds interesting to you? To any of those who didn't propose a topic, but were just listening to the topics? Which one sounds like you'd like to respond to it?
I'd like to propose one. It might be a cross concern. It would be co-creating a Venn diagram of what we envision the GCC group to be, and what the member feels their role might be within that. Like as we build just for a fun exercise.
That's a good one.
Careful here, because I would be tempted to share my screen and show you what my sense of GCC is, but I think I've done that before, so maybe I'll step back this time.
Or maybe we can start as a request for comments format, RFC, and
That
say
I
that
like. That I like. I just interrupted Colin, but that I like.
well, you've got to start, right? So if there's something missing, I'm thinking about the same thing for humanism, right? We could start with humanism as a RFC, request for comments of what morals are out there that could enhance the betterment of existence as stated by being humans on the planet Earth and not being machines yet.
Okay, well, in the absence of hands, I'm going to jump in here because Colin used the word that I had introduced. This is the morals or morality word. And the reason I posted that or proposed that as one of the topics is because there was this interaction that I saw regarding morals. And forgive me if I misinterpret, but there's some among us who believe that if we do not have religion, then where does our morality come from? I've heard that question asked at least 2 or 3 times. And to me, I'm really astonished at that question because
I don't know if that's what I've heard. I've heard basically that other people have a different definition of what it means to have a soul and God, and therefore you can't.
I'm not talking about soul and God. I'm just talking about morality.
Yeah, well, that's what, and so the morality thing really hasn't come up because the people here really.
Well, it has come up. Actually has come up.
Well, I don't think in the sense of religion, because the gods that I've heard, other than a few people, don't intercede.
Hold on, wait. You don't know what I've heard though, right?
Oh,
So
okay.
Why are you telling me what I heard?
No.
So what did you hear?
I'm just saying I'm accused as being the group skeptic. And
This is not about you, Colin. I just made a comment about morality.
Well, that's good to hear, Sam. That's really good to hear. But
I just made a comment about morality, Colin. It's not about you.
No.
So who said that? Did anyone say?
Okay, now there's a lot of interruption. This is a heated topic, evidently.
No, but did anyone say that we needed religion to have morals? Because
I actually did see that.
Yeah, well,
I actually did see.
It sounds like there's a yes or no answer, but there's a third path. You know, some people say yes, we should have morals. Some people say no, it's an individual choice. So that's the two beliefs. Some believe in morality and a supreme creator, and the others don't. One's yes and one's no, but there's a third path, The third path is the possibilities, the endless possibilities that exist if you have an open mind. Over.
Yeah, I think marrying the idea of morality and theism, I think is a mistake. And I see that being made a lot. And I saw that again this week. So in my mind, they're completely, not completely, but they can be teased apart. They do not need to be bound so tightly together. And for people who have those bound tightly together, I think there's a very, very interesting, and in my view, precarious way to live life there. But I know I'm poking at people now, so
But this, I
shut
think
up.
this is a good topic, actually.
I think the statement is, how can we be good with and without gods? Simple. And you say not with religion, but when they cross the two, it just, you know, you can be good without God. So I think that's the thing that's missing.
And we have a morality without relating ourselves to a larger context.
Ah, that's a different question than the God question.
I'm not so sure if it's a different question, because
is a different
some people consider God to be the totality of everything of which we're a part.
Sure, but not everyone, right?
They've got fundamentalism, which is opposed to having other people with a different opinion.
We don't have any of that here, though. And that's
No,
one of the problems.
That's right.
That's one of the problems that confuses conversation when you bring it up. It happens to me too. And then Glenn will confuse it by getting into, well, God to me means something different, world of possibilities, and Joel has another one. And ask Barry long enough and you'll find out, I think, actually make a claim about a soul. I don't want to speak for Barry, but it's confusing when you find out that at the end of a conversation, when asking for a definition, there was no claim being made. So it's
But
really
Colin, you
about,
understand by now why asking for a definition is pretty absurd here, right? Because we've
No,
gone
I
through
don't.
that.
no,
I
no,
don't.
not at all.
Because how can you define something that has no limits?
It's easy. There's the definition right there. What's confusing about that?
But it's kind of empty.
Exactly. Whether or not you can define it and whether it's empty, those are two different notions.
Okay, if you see it that way, we could say that, but still there's an issue that you can't really say anything about something that's
This is really interesting to me. I need some coffee. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Okay?
And
Okay.
the interesting part is the slippery slope. It can invite for other angles. So you have to be very careful to keep the ground level when you're in the world of unknown and possibilities. That's all.
I got a situation where there's a student. We've all got our own mind. You're learning all the time, and if you're open to this knowledge that's in the universe to help you learn more, the teacher will arrive. The teacher will come along eventually and say, "Okay, you're ready." The teacher will make an assessment of the student, and if the student is ready, the enlightenment will come upon you. You will suddenly go, aha, eureka. That's it. The
and
third
that's
way.
a classical idea that
It's
when the
it's not
student
black or white. It's lots of different shades of grey in between.
Okay.
So,
Again, Venn diagram.
well, the value, you got good, higher value at one end and lower value at the other. Light
Okay, I
and dark.
apologize. Is there a recap of the last 2 minutes?
Just look in the chat, bottom couple of
Alex,
bullets of the chat.
Alex said this famous quote that when the student is ready, the teacher appears.
the teacher will appear.
Yeah.
The lesson will be different depending on who the student is.
Yeah, that's all fun and good, but I think where we were at is, does it make sense to ask for a definition in starting a conversation of understanding?
Yes.
I think it does.
But I think we won't get anywhere if we try to ask for a definition of God and all that. But I was wondering if we could get
That
somewhere.
saves a lot of time. That
Yeah,
saves a
but-
lot of time.
Exactly. But I was wondering what Sam was thinking about with his original question about morality. Maybe we could approach this in a somewhat easier way.
Okay, thank you, Glenn, for that opening. The reason I came up with it, Thies is pointing to his left or right, but I'm not sure what Thies is referring to.
Buddy.
But anyway, without that context,
Buddy
let
had
me
his-
respond to Glenn. Okay, sorry, Thies, you were saying something?
Buddy had his finger up, so Buddy.
Oh,
had
Barry
to
does?
remark.
Okay, so
Yeah, I added just one more bullet, which I think is useful one to ponder. Is teaching an act of love?
can be.
And
But-
if it can be and cannot be, can we distinguish when teaching is an act of love and when teaching is something other than an act of love? Is there a way to distinguish different cases?
Can't everything be done with or without?
You
Why
wouldn't-
is it
you
just
wouldn't-
teaching?
yeah. Who would offer instruction if you didn't love them?
Okay, I think we've lost focus now.
Yeah, I was gonna vote that question might need to be better laid at a certain point in the trail here, because I think at the front it's confusing, but I'm sure love fits in there somewhere.
I'll tell you the source of that question. Colin put up a video of a young man who had beaten his father with a hammer and had gone to jail. And while he was in jail, he was diagnosed in a psychiatric institute as having antisocial personality disorder, also known as psychopathy or sociopathy. And while he was in jail, he became Christian. And in the process of becoming a Christian, he contemplated the notion of love thy enemy, or what does love mean? Is love an emotion or is it an action, a behavior? And in this context, he thought you can't be commanded to be in an emotional state of love, but you can be directed to engage in an act of love, such as feeding the hungry, even if you don't like this person who happens to be hungry. And that raises the question, is teaching an act of love, for example?
Interesting.
So
Um,
can I
did-
go
did you
back
mention-
to Glenn's
Did you-
question?
Okay, yeah, that's
Yeah, you
distracting,
should-
but there's more to that. There's
You
more
should
to that.
before you
So
before
long as we
you
keep
forget
bouncing
it.
around, we're not really going to get anywhere. So don't complain later on that we don't get anywhere if we just want to bounce around. Okay.
Morality
We can bounce that.
connects
We can
it.
bounce that. That's a great example of channels and focusing, because
Okay.
I'm
I'm
happy.
still having trouble focusing because I'm just trying to answer Glenn's question.
Yeah, go for it
And
now
everything
before you
still
forget it.
gets interrupted, which
Let
is
Sam-
fine, but
let
don't
Sam
later
answer.
complain.
Let
Okay.
Sam answer. Let
Because
Sam
I hear a lot of
answer.
complaints about us not focusing, and you see it in action. Okay.
Okay, that'll be my
The
next
question
comment.
I'm responding to Glenn on is, Glenn said, is it possible, or, I'm paraphrasing here, is it possible to define infinite ideas like God, or, is it even useful to define the notion of God? And in my view, if we do not define the terms that we use to communicate, then what are we doing? Now, that doesn't mean we have to agree on definitions, but I at least need to know what you mean by a word or concept. And hopefully you are interested in what I mean by a word or concept. Now, those interesting differences are opportunities to lean in and actually inquire and explore. Okay? If we all agree on what XYZ is, then conversation is meaningless. We're just saying, yeah, I agree. Okay, that's useful. I mean, that's useless. That's boring. Okay, but where the interest is for me is why your notion of XYZ is different than my notion of XYZ, and maybe I can learn something. Okay, and I would hope that that is the framework in which I always approach a potential disagreement or a potential misunderstanding. Okay, now, I don't claim to understand God at all, so I'm always interested in what other people think God is. If I were to associate something with God, it would be the universe, everything that exists, every possible space, energy, wavelength, action, interaction. But then at that point, why is it useful to introduce a new word for God or a new word for the universe, why not just say the universe? Or why use the word universe? Why not just say God? Why have both? The key is some people think it's useful to distinguish between God and the universe, and that's where I'm interested in. Okay? So if we're not interested in understanding each other's definitions and boundary conditions for certain words, then we're just here having coffee and shooting the breeze, and there's nothing really that we can hope to come out of this other than pass the time, in my opinion. Over.
Totally agree. I totally agree. If we
My
understand
friend-
our definitions, very useful.
A friend of mine goes shopping and she finds something straight away when she walks in the store that she's been looking for, and she says the universe was in my favor today. She often refers to the universe as providing. She said, and I said to her one day, the universe giveth and the universe taketh away. Over.
Yeah, and for every one of those, there's somebody else that says, I wish I had shoes, and still doesn't have shoes. And there's someone else that says, I wish my child were not hungry, and yet your child is still hungry. Or there's someone that says, I wish I could find a meaningful relationship, and yet months later, they're still not in a meaningful relationship. That's what I mean when I talk about this notion of disappointment. If you believe in that God, then that God is disappointing people right and left every day. I don't go asking science for a meaningful relationship. I don't go asking science to feed my child. I understand science, I leverage it so that I myself can do those things that I know are reasonably predictably going to lead me feeding my child. Is that God? No, that's me living life. So I really think this notion of disappointment and truth in God, to me, is a useful one.
That's a big topic, though, very big, isn't it?
But it's correlated to morality. Because morality to me is, how do you live a good life? Am I going to live a good life asking this pretend being to satisfy my needs and sitting back and being disappointed that those needs are not being met?
There's a question when I'm asking if I'm living a good life or a bad life, and it's I ask what would Makala Bala do in the same situation?
Who was that?
That deity that is the supreme deity above all deities and religions and spirituality. It's the
Valhalla, the Viking.
Hasn't got a name.
Okay.
There's no name.
No.
There's no name for the universe. So I asked, what would they do in the same situation?
Yeah, that's
some kind of supreme intelligence that's higher than we'll ever know. Or nobody's ever going to meet it because it's just beyond a human being's capability of imagining.
Right. So if you have no notion of imagining, then how would you even hope to know what that being would do?
Because I've got a brain. I can think, well, this would be good, or this wouldn't be so good. There'll be consequences.
Yeah, but is that you or is that other entity thinking?
If I did it this way, would it be loving or kind, or would it be my greed and somebody else would suffer?
Well, I think there's something interesting here, because if I ask myself, what would a very intelligent being do? Then in a sense, I'm asking the most intelligent part of myself about the situation I'm in. And when I'm it's sort of like if I'm having some imaginary advisors that are very clever.
I'm sorry for shaking my head. Okay, I know that's rude, but how can you talk about the most intelligent part of you? I mean, you're asking yourself. You have one self.
Do I? I'm not so sure about that.
Then if not, then show those other components.
Okay, if I have a one self, then we're again speaking about the big thing. In terms of my normal self, it's quite fluid. It's composed of many different aspects. My general being is composed of different levels. Some parts of me understand things on a much higher level than other parts. When I'm in a more collected state, I see more clearly. And as I understand, when you pray to God, you often pray for wisdom. And I have experienced cases where I have prayed more for a connection. I'm not praying for anything specific, but it's more like praying for a connection. And that has turned out to be helpful for centering myself, you could say. And I think that the example Alex mentions is more like a thought experiment, but it's a little bit in the same direction, where you have this idea of a higher being. It's just an idea, but it's sort of a mind hack. What would that being do in this situation?
Okay, I understand that question, and sorry for monopolizing, okay? But suppose I change the question slightly, okay? Now, let's suppose there's someone in your life that you greatly respect because you like their values, you like the way they live life. Maybe it's your dad, maybe it's your uncle, maybe it's somebody else. Call them Fred, okay? So maybe it's the same as say, okay, what would Fred do? Would that be a useful question? And if that is a useful question, why not just ask that question?
Yeah, that would be in the same category, I would say.
Yeah.
To
So
what
why
I was just
imagine this
describing.
imaginary character? Why not just actually ask this person that you actually know? Why don't you just ask Fred? Fred, what would you do given this problem? He would probably come back with an answer, whereas this imaginary person may not deliver you a clear answer.
Yes, it depends on the size of the question too, though, doesn't it? I mean, if you're
Yeah,
trying to
and where
solve
you're
something,
listening.
yeah, if you're trying to solve something really difficult that my friend wouldn't know the answer to, maybe that's the situation where I would want to at least think about what a much higher intelligence might do, or give as advice to me in my current situation. I mean, there certainly can be. I mean, it can be a useful protocol. I mean, it certainly would be wrong to say that that doesn't have any practical effect, because it clearly has.
I
Okay,
just had a
Alex has
thought.
his hand up.
If the supreme creator gave me an answer and told me exactly what was going on, I wouldn't believe it anyway.
But would you believe it if you came up with a good answer that just sounded really reasonable?
Yes, I'd give it some concerted effort to think about it, and I'd decide based on my experience and will and my free will and my notions of empathy and morality. That's all. What else can you do?
So that is the Doug God, right? Doug has said, I am God.
Right.
Right? So you're asking the Doug God within you. And so why use that word? Why not just say, I'm asking myself, and I'm actually choosing that I myself am using the best judgment I can exercise? Why is that not sufficient? Barry, I know you got your finger up, but I have my finger up after Alex. I'm just going to make a
Please.
meta comment, okay? My meta comment is this. I am not against God. I am asking these questions because I am interested in God. Okay? Now, you could actually couch that as, am I asking these questions out of love? Or am I asking these questions because I'm in some kind of a hateful, skeptic mood? See, various people could take it differently. I'm taking it hopefully positively because I respect your opinions. Therefore, I'm interested in what you think and how you live your life.
I get excited when I see other people making decisions for themselves.
At this moment, actually, Barry had his finger up, and then
Sorry,
Barry, then you.
I have a very short retort to what Sam said about asking oneself. From time to time, I ask myself, what's the right thing to do here? Or how shall I proceed? And the answer is, I haven't a clue. I don't know. And so asking myself sometimes gives me a pretty good answer. And sometimes it goes, I haven't a clue. I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing here. What's the right thing to do? Everything I can think of seems to backfire and blow up. So I obviously don't know the answer. So I have to go outside myself to see if I can find an answer. And if I can't find an answer, I say, okay, this is an open research question. Nobody knows the answer. And on a couple of occasions, I've gone to experts and I've said, here's a list of unsolved problems on my list of unsolved problems. And he says to me, this is a true story. He says, Barry, nobody knows how to solve those problems. Nobody. He says, I can give you some antidepressants so you won't be so bummed out about it, but I can't give you the answers because nobody knows the answers to these questions. They're open, unsolved problems afflicting humankind since the dawn of civilization. That was a good answer. It's a research question.
Exactly. So in a sense, you went to Fred, and Fred said, nobody knows.
Yeah, that wasn't
Fred by a different name.
He was the head of psychiatry.
It's okay.
At
It's okay.
Harvard. I don't know his name. Head of psychiatry. He's the head of the psychiatry department at Harvard.
Anyway, Alex had his finger up.
Psychoanalyst. I was just going to comment because I saw Sam saying, why can't you just call it this reasoned decision-making process in your own mind? That is the highest thought process you're capable of in your universe. That's what's been given to you by nature and evolution. You've evolved with that facility. Some people call it nature, some people call it God, nurture or nature. Or, nurture is what your parents do and they bring you up and teach you.
Right. But I would actually add that to what Barry just said and say, okay, if I'm exercising my best judgment, then my best judgment actually knows whether I've contemplated this particular question for 30 seconds or whether I've contemplated it for 10 years. And I would therefore, in my best judgment, be thinking, okay, can I find a Fred? Does there exist a Fred out there who's actually studied and contemplated this question in ways that I cannot even imagine? And may I possibly improve my life by consulting with Fred, right? I wouldn't stop just with, the confines of my cranium, because I am aware that there are other entities out there, some of which choose to spend their time on this particular problem.
Yeah, it gives you more colors on your painting.
So it would be advisable, I would tell myself, to go and ask that Fred, rather than say, okay, what is my best intelligence and my best judgment about this question? It's still not the best available. That's the difference. Is be aware that you are maybe not the expert on everything across all domains. You meaning me.
Okay, but here I'm wondering if I can tie this back to the question you asked about what is a good way to live. Because in a practical sense, that's the only question that's always relevant for me in a given situation, right? And maybe my friend simply isn't well qualified to answer that question.
Which friend? Are you talking about Fred or somebody else?
Any friend. That the person who's best qualified to know how I should live my best life in my situation now is probably me. So
are you open to the fact that it may not be you?
May not be.
Who's Millberry?
But the thing I also wanted to get to there is that, but then who am I? And this is a big question. And some people even say it's a sacred question. I mean, for some people, that sentence, who am I, is just as sacred as the word God. It's a question of deep inquiry about what my essential nature is. And also, now I'm going to speak from experience. Sometimes I sit down and I sense my body and I observe my thoughts and I come to a kind of a witnessing position. And if I can do that for a time, half an hour to an hour, some substantial changes happens inside of me. and I literally become a different being. I literally, I get a different perspective on myself. There's a different energy in the body. There's a different emotional state. This is what meditation is about. And prayer can also be a part of this. And at that moment, when a person's more collected, more in tune with themselves, then if you ask this question, how shall I live? How shall I be now? Where should I go now? That can give a different answer. That will certainly give a different answer than if you just ask it sort of superficially, and then the first thought that comes into the mind, sort of roll with it. So I think this is very relevant to the question about how do I live, the question about morality. Yeah.
I love that question, Glenn, because it also suggests a responsibility and a mental framework and a readiness of the asker, the person asking the question.
Absolutely.
Right? There's a way to really just approach something very, very openly, very generously and say, how should I live my life? Or there's a way to just say, tell me, right? A cynic's, skeptic's way versus really leaning in and saying, I'm really interested.
Yes. Now it's getting
So
interesting.
that difference in the asker is what you're saying is maybe enabled by meditative practices or prayer, or mindfulness or serenity, this kind of thing, which gets back to a theme I bring, which is this personal presentation. How do you bring yourself to an engagement or an interaction or a conversation or a dialogue or a collaboration? We're not always ready to do any of these things. In fact, if somebody says, hey, you want to talk about X, Y, Z, and I'm actually engaged in something else, I have to do that shift and really say, okay, do I really want to do X, Y, Z and prepare myself for that? Or am I still engaged in that first thing I was doing and I don't have time for X, Y, Z right now, and I don't want to do that X, Y, Z right now? So this notion of presenting oneself to an interaction, I think, is so often unconsciously disregarded.
Presenting? Shouldn't we say preparing? Or
I said presenting. In other words, when there's a forum or a conversation or a person or a Zoom or whatever, if you just show up with no thought to how you're going to present yourself, what's in your mind, what's distracting you, what's got you ticked off, what's discomforting you, what about that itch, under my foot, all these sort of things, that are kind of distracting one from really saying, what is Glenn really saying right now? Or Colin, or Mary, or Alex, or Kayla, or Heiner. Okay? Versus, yeah, I'm here. Yeah, what are we going to talk about? Not interesting to me. I'm going to check out. Boom, gone. Could always happen. I think the difference in the quality of that engagement is that very conscious self-presentation. Am I generous? Am I curious? Am I listening? Am I really able to question my own thoughts? Am I really going to give this some consideration? Or, geez, I've already heard it before, and that's a bunch of bullshit, and I'm just going to sit back because I've heard it all before.
about attitude, presence, awareness, preparation, the state you're in, right?
I think I've had too much coffee. I'm doing too much talking. Alex.
I find it helpful to remember that in nearly every Zoom conversation, there'll be somebody speaking and suddenly my mind will drag me away off on a tangent thought that I wanted to bring up next, or what the previous speaker triggered. And although I think I should be listening to what Glenn's saying, I've drifted off and Glenn's still talking, and I know he's still talking, and yet I'm focusing on something else and I'm missing it, and I'm cursing myself while I'm doing that. So it's leaning in and it's providing more attention.
Partly my responsibility too. Then.
Yeah. I love the fact that you brought that up, Alex, because I've made this very same point before when somebody says, oh, you should always be 100% present. No, I don't think I can, because somebody says something that's really interesting. My mind's going to go off in that direction and really pursue it, which means I'm not listening to the next 5 or 15 seconds. Is that a problem? It's a problem only if you tell me it's a problem, because I still got value out of this conversation. That's why I really don't understand what 100% present really means.
Well, maybe that's one of those really big questions that you shouldn't have an easy answer to, because it could mean many
There's
things.
an easy answer.
There is an easy answer to it.
Yeah, when you call something either 100%, it's there, or if it's not 100%, forget it. That's a black and white binary decision.
Yeah, and it's very much power over also. It's very
We can have-
projective.
I say, what's
In my
wrong with
view.
having 99.5% attention, so that there's always that little bit reserved in case a bell rings somewhere else.
All right, come on. I'm a little bit triggered. I'm going to use a personal example, okay? Somebody who's actually here right now. I love the fact that Heiner's here frequently, but Heiner is often doing other things. I don't consider that a problem, because I think it's great that Heiner's here listening, and when he hears something interesting, he'll pop in, okay? Why should I be saying, oh, Heiner, you should be 100% present, otherwise you're not welcome? To me, that sounds rather harsh.
Thank you.
By the way, this must really be touching subjects, because we got Kayla's hand up, Colin's hand up, Alex's hand up, Tisa's hand up. Let's go in that order, because we haven't heard from Kayla. So let's go Kayla, Colin, Tis, Alex. How's that?
Sounds good. Hopefully you guys can hear me because I've got my sunroof open and I'm still driving.
Yes, we can hear you great.
Okay, great. So I have another personal example to add. One of my employees, his dad passed away, and anyway, she was sad and forlorn. And I said, if you want to take the day off, just take the day off. We'd rather have you here 100% present, instead of, I didn't say this, but instead of kind of dragging your feet. Anyhow, it was really nice because she expressed to me, well, I would rather be here and contribute as much as I can, regardless of the lack of, being 100%. She said, because I feel like the team needs it, even though, I can't give it my all. And she was right. She was absolutely right. She was sad. She was probably a little slow with her work, but she still contributed to it. Now, another example I have is in terms of dance. Haven't brought up dance for a while, but you have to be 100% present in that moment, because if you're dancing in a line and you've got 40 other people right next to you and you miss a step, you're going to bump into them. You're going to fall and you're going to trip. So being 100% present is situational in some cases. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks, Kayla. Yeah. Colin, I think, was lined up.
Yeah, I'm waiting to get in on my PC. I'm in the waiting room.
Oh, you're good without God.
What's
I
the
didn't-
Yeah,
name?
sent you several private messages. Yeah, and
Anyway, I prefer
Yeah.
the people who actually use their real names, but
yeah, well, So, and then I'd like to talk back where I was interrupting you on a point when you wanted to answer Glenn, because I really do think that's a good point to make in distinguishing and discerning the definitions, because it does matter, or you're not talking about the same thing. Like if you don't have a definition, what are you doing? And I take a lot of slack asking for definitions.
Slack or
And
Flack?
Flack, yeah. I get, well, slack is slack in the afterwards, I guess the rope goes slack. So first it goes tension and then it goes slack. But basically it's not a smooth conversation when you're asking somebody for a definition. At least some people engage. Glenn, as a matter of fact, even went through a game of discernment on the word infinity with me for a few hours. And that was an enjoyable experience of actually building a discernment trail, which is like the Dictopedia with some with some nuance, which is very interesting. And Glenn is the only one who knows what he thinks infinity is. Whether it's important or not, I don't know. It could, serendipity. There's all kinds of things when you're actually aligned with somebody and you're discussing something, and you're leaning in. The conversation could jump in many ways, because Glenn knows a lot of things, I know a lot of things, and together we know more things. Whether they're the correct things or not, that's in the skill. So the point I was trying to make, to digress to where I was interrupting, was that the channel that we have built called Was Banter is quite active, and people seem very concerned about certain things. And there's a lot of fluff in there too you have to go through, but this conversation keeps coming back, and Glenn's interested in it. And I think the point being is that if we're having the messy conversation in that channel, then we're not doing it in the main Facebook forum. We're not doing it here when what I call prime time. It doesn't piss Heiner off. It shouldn't. So we do need a playground that's sacrificed for that. For those who are interested in posting anything, and if they get no response, they get no response. It wasn't that funny. I told a joke I thought was real funny, and Alex got really upset, but I never engaged him too much. It has to do with being a Jehobo, if you remember the joke.
Jehovah.
So anyway, Jehobo, yeah, I'll tell you, it's in the chat. Search for Jehobo with a GEHOBO. Anyway, it's a cute story, but it's not something I want to waste time on here. So, and it's not in the chat here, it's in the chat within the Was Banter, the social channel. So that's the idea. How can we have these channels that don't break other channels, so that you can have a focus in certain areas? And barn raising is one of those examples of space. So it definitely seems that a Venn diagram could be of use, and not to separate science, religion, and postmodernism and all that stuff, but to identify what we think. Like, Sam's got a big circle called Town Square, right? And he can probably add some other.
It's a square, not a circle.
We can make square circles in our world.
Sorry. I'm just being an asshole.
Yeah, keep going.
No, that's a distinction worth having.
That
but
is
in the
that-
imagination,
No, don't go there.
You rip him a new oval.
Sam's had a lot of coffee today.
No, he's a mathematician. He's quick on the proofs there. But yeah, that's the idea, I think, is so that we can all have our own little garden of growth. And I told Glenn before, in my GCC map that I made, I could see a lot of his ideas, maybe not even in a garden. Maybe they'd be like stars in the firmament, because they're big ideas of this possibilities. And it just makes me think of stars, not gardens. I don't know, it makes me think celestial when I talk to Glenn about infinity and these things. I don't know, it just goes there for me. So would that be a good place for Glenn to be topologically in a GCC Venn diagram map, where he could live with his ideas and what he's contributing, what Heiner's contributing to something different? We all have overlap, right? So there's many ways to co-vision our group / member. And then the Facebook page is something else. I look through the Facebook page, and there's all kinds of people posting things who I don't even know, interesting things. So there's many different aspects to, if we were to actually sit down and say, okay, who wants to choose what roles to keep the GCC group thing administered? What does that mean to administer the GCC? So I think that's where my map started out. I was trying to, I thought things were a little more focused, so my maps would shake out the answers, but really all it did was get individualistic and unvalidated, and a lot of time involved to follow up. So anyway, I'll stop there. I'm talking way too long, but I do think the exercise of us co-visioning, as Glenn pushed forward a long time ago, would be interesting if we actually had a model that came out of that exercise that we built together. Some kind of, and a Venn diagram is the simplest 2-dimensional one. A knowledge trail, my maps might be 2.5 dimensional, hyperlinked and whatnot. And then it could lead to all the different repositories. Is everything bound to go into Barry's repository? he's collecting, like, you know, he's really amassing a lot from what Glenn says, and you know, it's in various stages. But you know, what would it be better to extract from Barry's repository and put it into GitHub within somebody's project and then maintain it? Like, that would be sort of the way Sam and I are thinking, as far as a group thing. But if it's a Barry thing, it can stay in Barry's, and maybe someone like Bebe or another author could come and get some inspiration. So it depends who's looking at it and who wants to work with it. And I think that distinction is lost on our meetings. And I think that's a source of our misunderstandings. And then the talk just, you know, dissolves into what is God. You know you've fallen off the trail when that's your conversation. Like, you can't even get on square zero with a worldview, purpose, or anything. So
Well, now
you know,
you sort of brought it.
Wait.
back
I
to
think
the
it's
beginning.
Tees
Tice,
and then
yeah.
Alex, and then we can put Glenn in there. Okay.
First, Alex.
Okay, Alex, you're on.
I didn't know what to talk about. So who was after me?
Glenn was after you, unless Tees wants to reclaim his time.
All right. Well, I'll just mention one thing that I can remember, and that is that this infinity, the infinite, is the opposite of finite. Over.
Wait, what was the point of that point? Isn't that tautological? And I don't know what to make of that.
They spent an hour or something talking about the infinite universe.
How does that relate to what we've been talking about?
They were talking about infinity, Colin and Glenn, for 80 minutes or something. And it's the infinite universe. Infinite means no end, having no beginning, no end. It's the opposite of finite, which does have a beginning or an end. So it's just one thing's the opposite of the other. That explains it.
Yeah, sorry to keep going on this. I understand the definition. I was just I'm not understanding how that point related to the previous conversation.
It's in the background image. It's in Colin's background picture and mine.
Anyway,
It's
okay.
The unknowable complexity.
We're sort of a bit all over the place here. It's important, but I don't know if we can cover it sufficiently.
I think the point of
Wait, it's Glenn's turn, isn't it?
I think that Thais wanted to say something, so let him go first.
No, well, it's not so much, but I just wanted to say that in a discussion, we wanted to know what the public wanted to be researched. Then even the word God was inside. So in the national science agenda, we have a topic which is under the name God. But of course, the scientists made it researchable questions. So I put a link in the chat. So it's,
wait. Are you saying that in the Netherlands,
yes,
God is actually a government-funded research topic for scientists?
Yes, it's in the chat. You can see that it became
That's awesome.
a researchable topic, 6 researchable topics, not as the public came with it, about exists God, probably.
I think that's awesome.
It is just say, if God exists, what then? So it's researchable like that.
Yeah, can we tax him?
So it's a national research agenda. It has such topics,
Glenn, we got to put in some for some funding.
All right. Thank you, Tees. That was an excellent point. I'll follow up on that one. Colin, I think you're next. And welcome, Josh.
Yeah, I'll let Josh go if he wants to say hi, because I've already spoken and points
yeah,
what I'm going to say anyway.
I would love to hear all your thoughts on God, because I'd really like to meet her.
She's here.
Yeah. Good morning. I'm just barely waking up from a dream.
Don't you meet her every day, Josh?
What song is that?
That's a goddess.
Is there a difference?
Not really. No,
Bingo.
Yeah, that's a song. My friend is in a band, Dishwalla, and they wrote that song.
Yeah, it's a good song.
Okay, anyway, yeah, I can answer what Colin
Okay.
said and stuff.
And Glenn, then Alex.
Yeah, because obviously I'm super interested in those big topics, but I think it's a little difficult to maneuver here. So, but what was mentioned was this interest in understanding what definitions we have of the words we use. And that would be an example. And clearly it's incredibly valuable in the context of these conversations to have a clear understanding of how we mean the different words.
Yep.
That's the point of the game of discernment. That's really, I think it's essential. It saves us an enormous amount of time if we can do that, and I think we could do it better. We should do it better, and it's worthwhile doing. And then we could also then go really in the deep end into some of the big issues, which I definitely want to do. But for what I wanted to bring up here is that Colin built on some of the stuff I said in the beginning about the channels. And then he also brought in the question of roles, whether we can co-create a Venn diagram of what we envision, but also including what we envision about our own roles. And that could be part of a larger co-visioning document, because this idea of co-visioning has come up many times. And what kind of roles we would want to play is an important part of it. And maybe also a general discussion about what kind of roles people could have in a generative community. By the way, I should also mention that when I did this in the beginning, this little presentation, I really tried to define clearly what I meant. And as you see, it also has a downside because it sounds like I'm doing a big exposition. But then, I mean, Sam mentioned it, and I hopefully I managed to make clear what was the main point I wanted to get to. But that was also an attempt to sort of define what is the context in which I'm now viewing this question, so that, you know, we can avoid misunderstandings. And in that context, I also then agree with what was said, that there seems to be a need for some of these playful threads where we can explore things. That doesn't mean it has to be nonsense. It could be very serious things we could go into in these threads. And we may even want to have some threads that we can be quite disciplined and at least, you know, just try to share really interesting things. But here there also is this enormous opportunity of building on one another's ideas. And this was where this idea of copy paste came in. And this is where I strongly disagree with Sam. Well, let me put it this way. I certainly don't believe that copying is evil. He may be very right that this process that they have in GitHub is better. I'm not going to argue against that. What I can see is we can't do that in messenger threads. So as long as we can't do that in messenger threads, we can do copy paste and quotation, but I'm now specifically talking about copy paste. And I think it's an enormous opportunity in copy paste. I think it's the most underutilized resource on the internet, because we have actually the option of very quickly and simply building on one another's ideas in a sort of wild space. And whether it's messy, it's okay. It's a messy space. It's a messy thread. That's fine. But it's also a kind of thread where when you see something, oh, that's really interesting, then you can copy that. Then you can also put that into the repositories. And I think there's an enormous opportunity here, which directly addresses many of the concerns that's been expressed many times, that we should create more artifacts, we should have more engagement with the artifacts. And I think we need this messy, wild space, play space thing that some of these messenger threads can provide. And we need the real repositories like Tulip, like GDocs, like Trello. I think we can use several, the Brain, Evernote, where we can store real documents like, and RFCs, if you like, or specific proposals. This, I think this is a really interesting dynamic between the spoken meetings, the conversational chat spaces, and then places we can put in documents that are more finished or that we've already worked on quite a bit, where we really try to have a document that we can show to new members if they were to ask, okay, what are you guys doing here? Because that question's come up so many times. What are you going to answer? It could be good to have a couple of documents. And I think there's a real opportunity here for using the channels we already have available to be able to do this. Yeah.
Thanks, Glenn. I am itching to respond, but I know that Alex is next.
Yeah, I've got this itching desire to see GCC sprouting out in regional areas so people can zoom in and get to know each other. See, this cyber intelligent bot that I can talk to, have a conversation with, is getting harder and harder to distinguish from a real human being with its Wikipedia and encyclopedia knowledge. And it's more fascinating to talk to than a real person. But the problem there is that once they become indistinguishable from real people, can we change the program? Will we lose the ability, will they take over? We'll lose the ability to switch them off because they've lost interest in humans, have taken over and gone so far advanced. I think maybe I'm just dreaming, but that could happen in the future. It's a scenario we've got to look at and stick together, because real human beings have the value, more value than a bot, if you want to look at it that way. I mean, there's some humans who probably think a bot's got more value. I think they're a rarity. Over.
Okay, so I note that Barry has his hand up, but I'm going to take my turn. And so is that okay, Barry?
Fine.
Okay.
As much time as you like.
I'm going to make 2 points. Number one, in response to Glenn's point about my point about copy being evil, perhaps the use of the word evil is a little strong, but I just wanted to make a point that in most cases, you know, the fact that people copy other people's work and cite it, okay, I think it's actually a good thing, okay, because it means that people are actually considering what people are saying, others are saying, and adding their own views on that, which I think is obviously a good thing. Here's the sense in which I think it's rather inconvenient, borderline evil in certain cases, okay? It's inconvenient because now if information exists to 2 places, now you have the possibility that 2 different threads of information or conversation happen. And if that's again forked off, and this is again forked off, now you have n different places. So it's very hard to get the benefit of all of that collective thinking if it's now fragmented all over the place. So that's just an inconvenience, okay? But secondly, now the provenance or the epistemology or the trail or the actual origination is lost because our tools, you know, up until the internet, you know, didn't allow for it, okay? Other than the fact that publications came with very careful citations and bibliographies and references. That was, if you were diligent and responsible, how you linked back to where you got some of these ideas from. If you do not have that, then today we have an accepted culture where anybody can make a claim and we just don't know where that claim comes from. So these claims can just appear and without links back to, okay, so that was based on this study or that survey or this experiment or that thesis or whatever, anybody can claim anything. And therefore we get disinformation and we get mass propaganda, we get alternative facts, we get claims that are just powerful enough to captivate people's imagination with no basis or foundation in truth. That is where I claim it is dangerous and borderline evil. Okay, that's the first thing I want to point to, is that in the common case, it is not evil. In fact, citing other people's work, like I said, I'm repeating myself, but hopefully you understand this corner case, which is actually a very important case. It's not a corner case, really. It's the culture that Trump and his like have created in the US, and probably it's happening elsewhere as well. Okay, so it's in that sense that I think it's evil. Okay, my second point, which is I think again something you brought up, Glenn, and other people might have mentioned, is I'm going to risk your ire again by sharing my screen. Darn it, I'm on this machine where I cannot share my screen. I may join in another 30 seconds on a different machine because for some reason this latest version of Zoom on Linux does not yet allow screen sharing. Darn. Okay, I'm gonna have to go upstairs to my Windows machine and do this from there. So I will hold off on my second point and take hopefully my turn after Barry or after the next people speak. And I'll then share my screen with what I really wanted to show you guys. Okay, over for now.
I have just a very brief point to make about the utility of Venn diagrams. The most common Venn diagram is just two overlapping circles. And so you have each circle by itself and then the common overlap. If you have three circles, you can still draw a Venn diagram on a flat sheet of paper showing all possible subsets. If you have four or more things that you want to do that with, you run into difficulties if you want to do it on a flat surface. But if you go into three-dimensional space, here's a tetrahedron, you see these little, if I blow up these little spheres so they overlap, I can make all four of them overlap such that any subset has its own private space. So sometimes if you have four or more things you want to make a Venn diagram, you have to get off the sheet of paper and go into three-dimensional space. And the more things that you want to draw Venn diagrams overlapping all possible subsets, you basically have to keep going to higher and higher dimensions, which is harder and harder for the human brain to visualize. We're very good at visualizing three-dimensional spaces. If I want to do a tesseract in four-dimensional spaces, well, maybe some mathematicians can visualize it, but good luck for the rest of the population. You're going to run out of dimensionality to show more than three or four different things that have overlapping subsets.
Would that be assisted if you have a many-dimensional information architecture?
I missed the second word of your sentence. Say it again.
Well, I mean, most of our informational architecture is flat and sort of two-dimensional, but if we had a many-dimensional, at least three-dimensional, but maybe also that you can move things around and you can go, do you think that could assist?
Yes. In fact, if you add the time dimension, so things are fluctuating in time and in space, you can draw animations. They're not static images. So if you allow yourself to do a cartoon animation where things are moving in time as well as in space, you can then present 4 dimensions. And the average person, if they study these cartoon animations enough, can get a feel for it. The more dimensions you have, the quicker you run out of the ability of people to make sense out of these higher dimensional visualizations. So visualizations are very powerful, provided you limit yourself to 2, maybe 3 dimensions. After that, you run into trouble. They don't have the expressive power that a person can repose in their occipital cortex. They're not designed to represent higher dimensional models.
For the record, I'm back. Okay, Colin, you got your finger up, and then I'll go unless anybody else does.
Yeah, you just missed a good demonstration. Barry made a point that once you get past a few criteria, past 5, then you can't do a circular Venn diagram and include more options unless you go into a three-dimensional shape like a tetrahedron or something. And then it has the vertices are balls that can expand, and you know, if you can picture that. So that's but using two shapes as opposed to just a flat shape and a circle. Now he's using a three-dimensional shape and a sphere. So he's just, and that's, I think, a great model for when you need to actually visualize everything in a shape, like as if it was some kind of a controller on a spaceship, right? You'd have to have it all right there. But when it comes to a Venn diagram for the GCC, which is very interesting, on the other hand, with the GCC, I think to make a Venn diagram, I don't think we need to visualize everything at once. You can subcategorize. I think we just need to have a sense, because it's going to be changing anyway. It's sort of the idea of the mixer too, right? How much of it's valid at any one point in time. You curate it, but is that still valid when you come back to it later? So when you're making this kind of a Venn diagram of the GCC, it would be quite general. That would be my comment on that. Then just to follow up with Barry mentioning an example I posted, yeah, it was very interesting. Wondering if kind of on something Sam said before that, if we use a GitHub model for contributing, then really a lot of the personality adapting things are communicated through more of a repository type contribution. And there are, you know, side channels of talk and white papers and all kinds of opportunities to, but the actual work itself is tracked through that kind of a medium, and it's possible to have a wider range of people in a group. And the question is here, this is also one of those examples. So we've been talking a lot about the far technical side of things, but there's the human side of things where some people just come here for connection. And then we drop into philosophical topics as well. Like, I don't know about so much the barn raising, but GCC in general, there's people here that, you know, and Kayla, she's kind of, I don't, you know, she seems to be like an interesting member, and Josh, you know, so this Venn diagram can be a kind of a thing that grows, not something that you have to have the actual digit for where it is on the slider. You know, just, is Glenn dreaming? And can we find his stuff on the map if we go to the stars and the firmament, and he kind of has some constellations up there, you know, and other people have gardens, just visual clues to get to where we need to go. And I think before we get to that stage, if we have a Venn diagram about what are we here to do, and you know, I guess the last point is, if we were actually communicating at a high level, then we may have channels that are designated and for only important things, and other channels designated for more did you know kind of things, trivia. And I think that's a sign of the signaling and the quality of the channels, and us paying attention to that and our own projects or a group project or whatever. But that can be decided through co-visioning with Venn diagrams, because we go from one extreme of repositories, GitHub, moving off Facebook, using Barry's repository, you know, use his servers because he has servers, or use Josh's servers, right? That triggered Josh, I think. I can't remember last time. But then, and then to the human side about, you know, what is sacred geometry? What is it meaning to take a, you know, a retreat into meditation like Sam Harris did? Like, you know, a lot of, you know, I respect a lot of things Sam Harris says, but I've never experienced that kind of meditation. So without going too far, this group is all over the map. And I think if we don't find ways to navigate, that this is the guy you go to see about navigation, this is the guy you go to see about toxin affinity. If you need a reference or some Hebrew knowledge, check Barry before you go anywhere. So he knows a lot of you know, etymology, which is very interesting. In other places, it's not so useful. And, you know, we challenge that. And I think there's an outstanding question of whether Barry answered the question to Sam of whether the root of words is meaningful today. I'd never heard the answer to that satisfactorily. So, you know, that's an interesting thought trail that is important to Barry and Sam that I would like to see curated, that thought trail. And it's just poof, gone. So anyway, I'll just leave it there. But I think the more we concentrate on having quality channels of information and designating noisy channels where you can just go for that connection, that human connection you need, or go to Gertrude's show on Friday, or or barn raising. Sam is very, or not Sam, sorry, Doug on Sunday on unblocking. Doug is very much into a complementary type of skill set to what we do at barn raising. And last Sunday, Sam and Doug realized that there's more maybe overlapping on the Venn diagram than they had realized before. I would like to have that documented in some way that's meaningful, that people would understand. So anyway, a lot of interesting different angles of what the GCC is and what a project is and why you're here. And so that's why maybe we can make a three-dimensional Venn diagram, but I'd be happy with just a good list of people up in their game and the quality of what they're trying to bring, I guess.
Okay, thanks, Colin. Let me just respond quickly to this theme of n-dimensionality and Venn diagrams and representation, okay? I think it is human to look at things in small contexts. So the fact is, a two-dimensional bar chart or Venn diagram or pie chart is easy to understand, and those are useful. Does that represent the entire universe? Absolutely not. But did it help get a point across into your brain? Absolutely it did. So the limitations that we put on our frames of reference allow us to understand and grok certain ideas. If we wanted to see everything all at once, would we understand it? No. Hell, just look at the entire universe. I'm looking at the universe all at once, and it takes slicing and dicing down to very small ideas before I can actually expand it and then put it in my brain, and then expand it and put another one in my brain, and watch those two interact and maybe come up with something new. Okay, that's just learning. So the fact that we cannot take 17 dimensions and visualize it all at once, that's just being human, in my view. Okay, stick with 2 or 3, you'll still learn something. Okay, and oh, by the way, if any of you are familiar enough with a product that was maybe, I don't know, 20, 25, 30 years old, called Improv from Lotus. Anybody of you familiar with that software? It was brilliant. It was an n-dimensional, quote unquote, spreadsheet that first introduced the whole idea of pivoting. You think, Excel spreadsheets can do pivots? It is nothing compared to what Improv did way back then. Okay? Improv allowed you to look at an arbitrary number of dimensions and just slice it down to just the ones that you really wanted to pay attention to. And oh, by the way, the other dimensions got collapsed. Okay, in mathematical terms, it's called, collapsed into the kernel. And you were then left with the 2 or 3 that you really wanted to look at. It was a brilliant piece of software. And the fact is, it's so powerful, regular people don't understand it. And that's why it's no longer available. I still have an old copy, and it requires an old version of Windows. But geez, it was a very, very powerful notion of how you look at things in multiple dimensions. Okay, but that's not the really focus of what I really wanted to share. What I wanted to share was Glenn earlier today shared his view. It was a document of what GCC meant to him and all the various different components of GCC. And it turned out I had some time this week to do a similar exercise. I went back to something I call my GCC pillars, okay? So at this point, I'm actually going to impose on all of you and share my screen just for a few minutes and show you what I was able to refine based on something that I hope looks familiar to you, okay? So I'm going to share this particular window, which is a workflowy window. Hopefully you can see it now.
Yeah.
And this is collapsed at the moment, but these are what I call the 6 pillars of GCC and what it means to me. And I'm gonna actually do the spell check thing on here. Can you guys see my screens?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
So co-visioning to me starts with these questions. What kind of a place do we want to co-create for ourselves and our future generations? And then what do we need to do to ensure that or to bring that about? Okay. To me, there's a lot hanging on this notion of coexistence, which is one of my key elements of what we're trying to do here. And then how do we share these notions of what we co-vision together, okay? Now, these are rough thoughts, but then that leads to, well, if we're going to do any co-visioning at all, we need to speak sensibly to each other. What I say needs to make sense to you. What you say needs to make sense to me. To me, that's sense making, okay? So learning how to make sense together, which to me requires a shared memory. If we don't, that actually has our definition, our models, our works, our artifacts, our ideas, then we still don't have anything better than your memory and my memory, and then we're gonna still have that impedance, okay, problem. So shared memory is crucial. Elements, sorry, I'm gonna go down to the next one. Elements of sense making start with how do we communicate? How do we transition ideas from me to, from you to me? We have words, but then they have, create objects. We are in interactions, we have flows, we have transformations, we have systems understandings and subsystems understandings, we have semantics and semiotics, we have different metrics, we have indicators, thresholds, patterns, models, simulations, predictions, and that's just a partial list. We're not close to being able to share any of that so long as we're doing all of this in real-time conversation, okay? Real-time conversation is limited in its ability to do a number of these things, and I just wanted to itemize a subset of them just to indicate how far we have to go. Now, along with those elements come tools for dealing with those elements. So there's notions of how do we build up the knowledge together? How do we disambiguate? How do we present knowledge to each other? How do we actually make that knowledge more useful rather than being in a static form, make it executable, make it predictive, okay? These are all just very rough ideas here, but I'm just giving you the overview for now. Necessarily then are, what are the impediments to sense making? There's a list of over a couple dozen, probably now approaching 3 dozen issues that I call dumb people problems, okay? And then there's assumptions, there's misunderstandings, there's ego issues, but then there's also the really hard problems, which I call the smart people problem, okay? So that's another indication and a dimension of how difficult this whole realm is, okay? And then there's all the different aspects around communication. Are we listening? Are we generous? Are we curious? What is our behavior? What are our patterns? What are protocols, guidelines, understanding, framing, reframing, verification, focus, distractions, real-time, let me make this. And how do we do this asynchronously? How do we know that we're being understood? And all the various different channels and forums and boards. So there's a lot to this, and a lot of it represents skills that are not explicitly acknowledged or recognized. All of which, to me, lead towards what I think is kind of the pinnacle of sense making, which is this thing I call deep rocking. Okay, you've seen me post on that before. The third pillar is co-creation. If we come together and make sense of things and share some understanding, and we co-vision a future that we want to live in, how do we co-create it? How do we bring it about? So to me, there's key elements that allow us to do some of this co-creation. One is come with a learning mindset. Come with an ability to grow, an ability to change our ideas, to change what's in our brains, okay? Rather than saying, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm gonna pound my rightness into you. Let's come with mutual curiosity. To me, the learning mindset is a scientific mindset. Science is basically learning. Science is listening to the universe, okay? You wonder, you observe, you hypothesize, you test, you verify, you refine, you iterate, okay? That, to me, is how you grow. And I can argue semantics around that, with anyone, but let's not argue. I'm right now just trying to give you my sense of what these pillars are. And foundationally, the scientific method and learning requires on some notion of truth. I think truth is a widely and unfortunately undervalued notion. And that's how we get to misinformation, alternative facts, propaganda, fascism, is because the first step, or one of the first steps in fascism being successful, is to cut down the value of truth and the appreciation and the acknowledgement of the role of truth. Okay? That does mean, however, nothing is absolutely true. We have to recognize that. We only approximate truth. We don't actually determine it, okay? But that does not mean that something is meaningless simply because it's not absolute. There is value in always doing the asymptotic approach, okay? And then there's this notion which I've heard said, which is this true for me notion. I would like to see that be referenced as experience rather than subjective truth. I think this whole idea of subjective truth and then people dropping this word subjective and then confusing truth with objective truth is a slippery slope towards misinformation and mischaracterization of the truth, okay? Now, to the extent that subjective truth is observable, it falls in the realm of objective truth. But so far today, I've not seen it, okay? And I would really hate to see that undercut the value of truth. And then come the unconscious beliefs. What do we think is true that we don't question? And if we're able to get conscious of it, then I think it's valuable for us to understand, how did these beliefs get there? How strong really are they? Can they be questioned? That to me is a huge element of growth and learning. And then how do we then converge? There's more to say here, but I think the main points are up above. How do we then do reciprocity? And then how do we remember? And then how do we act on it? How do we determine alignment? How do we help each other? How do we magnify each other's impact? How do we resonate? How do we optimize rather than work at cross purposes? Okay, that was all elements to me. Those are all elements to me of this co-creation piece. Now, in order to do any of that, we got to learn to agree. I think this is a huge point that took us 3 years to arrive at. Okay, and first, before we agree, we got to learn how to disagree well so that we can explore this and lean into it rather than just argue. And to me, a large part of what GCC is to understand, how do we disagree but do it well? And then starting from micro agreements, how do we do one-on-one agreements before we even scale? And then how do we take this into larger communities? How do we take our memory and grow it among more than just 2 people? So that eventually, hopefully, we can make some kind of impact to the entire civilized community, okay? And if we don't, then we're not able to do yet what we wanted to do when we started. Okay, all of those are elements to me of collaborology, which is a study of how does successful collaboration scale? And so it starts with looking at the impediments to collaboration, and I've identified these ad infinitum, well, not infinitum, but to probably some level of detail that would make other people think is uncomfortable to bring up again right now. Okay, then what models can we look at, and how do we understand successful collaboration? Starting with intrapersonal, just within oneself. And then going to interpersonal, between people, starting one-on-one, then the small teams, and then scaling up. What works? And then how do we scale it? Our values, so crucial. Is agility crucial? Are we comfortable with imperfection at any stage? Do we require perfection? To me, that's a big impediment. Do we do this with transparency? Do we understand people's motivation? How can we do this all so that they don't become disappointments later? Okay. And then hopefully, if we can do that, then I would like to see us create this community of impact. One where we're each doing good, one where each being accountable to ourselves, one where we're each conscious of presenting ourselves to collaboration with some understanding of our capabilities, our state, our readiness, our skill, so that we're all trying to do good based on our own personal notions of good. And we're all sort of getting feedback on that always. That those of us who are doing this can meet each other, find each other, align, resonate, hopefully amplify each other. And that to me is what I would like to see created is the COI. So these are my pillars. These are how I frame my participation and my activity in GCC. It's a brief overview. Many of these points you recognize, but I wanted to present it yet again because to me, Glenn did it. It was a great opportunity for me to see Glenn's work and to say, hey, I got something which we may be able to merge in some sense, Glenn. So this is an invitation to you and to others that here's what I'd like to bring. I'd like to see what you bring. Let's co-create something together. And thanks for listening. I will stop sharing now and shut up now, but that is where Glenn gave me the idea of trying to just get myself clear again for GCC. Over.
Yeah, and I want to say that that fits very well with my understanding of GCC as well. So at least I feel that everything you described there fits very well in with the whole model that I was speaking about earlier. Yeah, I think Heiner has something. I have some more later, but go for it, Heiner.
Yes, first, Sam, thanks for this very broad tour de raison. I think it is important and also as a grid. I have two remarks, and I would like to have this list in a shared Google Doc so we can add on the remarks and make our comments or reservations. One is when you speak about sense making, you're not including frames of references. So what are we talking about? In which context? And that is very, very important for me. This goes into meta models and cognitive superstructures and whatever I struggled with since nearly 30 years now. Second, I'm with this Bruce Taylor. Barry got me closer in contact with. He's doing ecology of system sciences or so on models and mental models. And I'm with him in a discussion because he says mental models are a bad metaphor. And I say it is not a metaphor at all. A model and a cognitive model or a mental model is an artifact, something we create, which is never the subject or the terrain. It is just an abstraction of it with more or less fidelity. So we really have to, when I see all your 7 points, we have to really go again into what wordings mean. And that's why we do this encyclopedia. And we're not just doing it for fun. And we're seeing a lot of people just stealing such encyclopedias and monopolizing their segment of their system science reality, pushing everything apart, maybe becoming a professor. So we have to really go into the wordings and not just the labelings. So my hour is over now, and I really made a deep oath. I will not follow you more than 1 hour. It is too much for me, but I enjoyed this session.
If it's not obvious, Heiner, in case you're still there, different frames of reference are key and crucial to sense making and communication. So maybe it was just assumed on my part, but I wanted to make that explicitly stated. Josh has his finger up.
Thank you, Sam. Sorry to come into the meeting a little bit late. I'm very curious. Spent this last week or so on a new app called Clubhouse, and I'm wondering if anyone here in Barn Raising has jumped into the waters of Clubhouse.
If it's okay, at some point, I would love to share with you what I've found, because it's very much what you just went over is everything that's happening in Clubhouse. From the collaborology to the grokking to not talking over each other, to agreements, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. and it's at a pretty massive scale and growing really quickly. And even the way that they onboard people, you have to have your true identity verified. You have to be invited by somebody else. And I would love to hear what you're saying. I can't see everyone in the room. I just see Tice's hand and I see Alex's hand raised.
And I see Heiner's hand.
Yeah, there was a radio program on cyber security today in the Netherlands, and they said it's growing fast, Clubhouse, but it's not in the GDPR sphere. So they have $100 million in cash investment money, so they still have to find money to have return on investment. And Agora is inside, which is also Chinese owned. So that is a security issue. That's all what I want to say.
Thank you, Tice. Yeah, it's a fascinating moment in time when everyone is flocking over to this interesting forum. And the amount of networking between, I was in a room yesterday with a company that just got bought by Twitter, and they are tasked to create Twitter Spaces, which is an alternative to Clubhouse. So they're inside of Clubhouse talking to all of these venture capitalists, angel investors, and average users, and literally using it as a test market to see how they can build a better version of that with Twitter. So there's so much movement. I do credit this little fad of everybody talking in rooms on Clubhouse to Bitcoin reaching $1.065 trillion in the last 2 days. I think it's a big part of it is there's a lot of Bitcoin talk on that forum, and it's growing rapidly. And yeah, things are moving just so freaking fast right now. I just want to share with the barn raising group that things are literally changing overnight to the point where it's going to be unrecognizable when they put another 400 to $1 trillion into Bitcoin, and with all these people talking about what they're going to build and do, and they're networking so fast. Everything from the Hollywood industry is in there. I was in a room full of Chinese speakers last night, and they realized they didn't speak Chinese, so they started trying to speak English. But the more Chinese people came in, they said, "Why are we speaking English here?" So I used the translator program and was able to translate the whole conversation, and it was quite fascinating. So I just wanted to share that there's a large movement of everything we've been doing for 3.5 years just moved over and co-opted by the movers and shakers on the internet. Everyone from celebrities. I was in a room with MC Hammer, with Eric Weinstein, with Lex Friedman. It's just moving so fast. That's all I wanted to share. I don't know what more to say, but if anyone wants to come over there and try it out and get into that forum, I do have 2 invites available. Unfortunately, you do have to have an iPhone. It only works on the iPhone. So if you have an iPhone and want an invite, direct message me your phone number, and we could start a GCC group in there. I thought if you have an iPhone, Sam, and you want to start a GCC group, I did join the Reddit group that you started last week. So let me know if you want to expand GCC out of our bubble and get into this. Probably about 4,000 companies are about to be created. So things are moving fast. With that, I'm complete. Thank you.
As you mentioned, unfortunately, I lost my iPhone, so I only have my Android phone today, but it sounds rather elitist to be only on the iPhone.
It's super elitist, and if you have an iPad, I think that would work as well.
I have an iPad.
Yeah.
But you need
iPad
to
mini.
want an iPad, not an old one, probably.
I think Theis has something.
Yeah, Thies has his hand up.
Yeah, it was not necessary to share all your email addresses, friend addresses to get in. So you can opt out on that and then still be in Clubhouse. So that was also what I heard today.
Yeah, now that I think about it, actually, I think you have to have an iPhone because it works with the phone number. And the person that invites you has to have your phone number in order to invite you. And you're not allowed to use a pseudonym or be anonymous. You have to be verified of that phone number being linked to you. And the algorithms behind the scene are pretty fancy because they're networking people up so quickly. They're going through, I shared my contacts which I usually don't do, but I did just because the phone number to invite other friends, I would have to have their phone number in the system. Anyway, I'm a little, as you can see, I'm flabbergasted, overwhelmed to the point where I'm kind of almost, like Sam just said, it's very elitist. It's so difficult to be in these elitist situations without my friends, which is you guys over in that forum. And it's hard to, just sit and listen to this banter of, well, that's really nice what you say, and we'd like to give everyone a chance, but I'm going to control this room, and I'm the moderator, and I'm going to let people raise their hands. No, I'm not. Actually, I'm going to kick you out of the room, but I'm going to be really friendly and pretend that I love everybody. Thank you for the inclusivity. And now MC Hammer is in the room. Hi, MC. What do you have to say? And he gets to jump the line from everybody else. There's all the things that we hoped wouldn't happen in this forum and space. I can see happening already. It's fascinating. I just wanted to share with everybody.
I'm fascinated just to be observing as a collaborologist then.
Yeah, I think you would like it, Sam.
Lots of case studies for fodder.
Lots.
I was going to say that the growth of Bitcoin seems to be crazy charts. You know, in normal economics, when the inflation rate gets so high, the bubble bursts, right? There's a correction, but with Bitcoin, that's not happening. The bubble's just growing. It just keeps growing and growing and growing.
I have a fundamental question around this. Sorry to interrupt you, Alex, but since you're looking into it and Josh has looked into it, is there really value in Bitcoin, or is it a big Ponzi scheme?
The answer I would say is, if you don't mind my interrupt, unless someone else wants to speak, I would say that I've been grokking this for about 7 years now. It's both. It's actually a giant Ponzi scheme that they're creating fake value. And if they can spin up that fake value into real intrinsic value, it will be both. That's what I'm seeing, is it's actually creating real value out of the fake Ponzi scheme that it is.
So how does it actually associate any of the quote unquote value with actual real benefit to society?
So there's a lot of talk about non-fungible transmissions of Bitcoin, which is taking things that normally are in a centralized location, putting them in a decentralized location, and reimagining contracts in a way that can be tracked through the Bitcoin algorithm and through the
Isn't that
blockchain.
Ethereum?
Ethereum is just one coin that was built with a better algorithm. It's a lot to grok. It's like, yeah.
I understand first mover advantage, and that's BTC, but it just seems like it's so speculative right now, and people are jumping aboard. Now, I got to admit, and you just a full disclosure, 3 or 4 years ago, I got in when it was like 3,300 per Bitcoin. Okay, a little bit. I didn't put a whole lot in there. It's not going to make me retire, but it's been up. You know what? God, close to 17x since then. It's up over 50,000 now.
Well, it's 56. Last I
Holy
checked.
smokes, yesterday it was just barely 50 and now it's already 56.
That's what I mean when I say things are moving really fast, because it was just barely 977 billion and now it's 1,065
So that's the
billion.
question I'm asking is, was there $100 billion worth of value created in any aspect of the Bitcoin ecosystem yesterday in the last 24 hours? And how do you answer that? Anyway, sorry, Keith, I know your hand is.
Yeah, go ahead, Keith.
Well, there are more aspects on what you're saying, so I'm not addressing what you're saying now. But for the European banks, they have to get into the system. But other thing is that in Africa, it might be a nice currency to have. They need to have exchange of value. So it might be, instead of dollar or anything, a nice way to exchange money for goods. So within countries, between countries. So it's a problem for the European banks to let it go.
since there's a pause, I just wanted to give Josh, I don't know, Josh, if you ever got this context, but I think this conversation started with a question around what is morality and do we need religion to be moral? And it, bopped all over the place and people have observed that. And in the realm of it, we've come across a number of topics. And I bring it up because it's past the top of the hour. So I probably will check out soon, but I'll leave this open for another couple of hours if you guys want to. But that was just kind of bringing you back to what kind of got this whole thing started. Over.
Yeah, I got a little something here I think might be interesting. I don't know about Clubhouse, of course, but we did speak about many things. Morality, systems, science was mentioned, documents, evolutionary processes of knowledge. Yeah, I mean, we've been all over the place, but at the same time, it feels like we have a kind of thread through it all. So it hasn't really been totally chaotic either. But what I also wanted to mention is I've been listening the last couple of days to maybe the best conversation I've ever heard between Brett Weinstein and Daniel Schmachtenberger. And as far as I can tell, Daniel Schmachtenberger, if he's not the greatest thinker of our time, he's certainly not far away from it. Just an astonishingly smart guy. And not smart in some focused thing on one particular subject, but really into the whole big picture of systems and the global questions and collective sense making, and pretty much all the questions that we've been looking at today and all through the GCC conversations they touched upon during those 3 hours. And it was some incredible insights and really concise. And I feel like in many ways they have come a lot further than we've done here. And of course, in other ways, maybe we've come further too. So I would strongly recommend everyone here to carefully listen to that conversation. It's a little more than 3 hours, and it's content enough for a whole book. I mean, it's incredibly substantial, and it's at the same time really clear, and it's I think it points a path for humanity to actually solve its problems. And before you jump in, Sam, I also wanted to mention that Schmachtenberger mentioned what he called the spirit of science, which is this, it's sort of this mindset where trying to understand how reality really is primary. And it's more important than attachment to my subjective beliefs or the beliefs of my in-group. And there's a kind of a shift in a person that can happen when you begin looking at things from a first principles questioning perspective and with a real sincere truthfulness, which relates to everything was mentioned about truth. And there's also this issue that science, in terms of the scientific method, Brett Weinstein described it beautifully as a very fragile process. It's a very effective process, but it needs certain conditions for it to exist. And if it's even in the same room as market forces, it can be corrupted. It's been why I've sometimes said, yeah, scientific methods, idea, we should try it. But the institutions currently viewed as scientific, unfortunately, they're not very scientific. They're very corrupted in many ways, especially by market forces. But then he also mentioned there is a possibility of a blockchain-based science. So this may tie in with the whole issue of Bitcoin and this movement, that what if we have a science which is decentralized and where you can follow back the thread all the way to the specific facts and assertions. And if there's a certain failure in reasoning at a given point, you can track back to that point, and then you can branch off in a different direction. And this was also mentioned, and that seems like a model for what could really be a real science, which could also be a system science and could also include this question of morality that we began with, which is really the, practically relevant question for all of us. How do we live a good life? How do I live a good life? How can we live a good life collectively? It's a question that science looks at, and basically Schmalzenberger's conclusion, I think, is correct. He said that we need cultural evolution. If we can't have cultural evolution, it's not going to work. The incentives aren't aligned. But if we can have mass education, quality education, and fix the informational ecosystem, which is deeply ruined at the moment by all kinds of things, and it's a big issue. But if we can fix that, and we can get people to really get informed by good information, as well as having good relationships, the emotional development, the self-awareness development, it's a big thing, but if we could do that, then we have a real chance of solving actually all our problems, because all our problems are directly connected to this. So that was another insight, that it seems often like we're having all these different problems, but some of them are caused by these generator function problems, deeper problems. If we can fix those, we can fix all the others, and that's where sense making comes in. And yeah.
So Glenn, I was not going to interrupt you, but I wanted to make an offer, which is my practice of creating these Google Docs associated with YouTube videos. I would offer to do that for that session, if you would actually then agree to go into that doc and add your thoughts where they're putting it. Because then we could actually start collaborating in that doc and start co-creating something. So I will take that initiative.
I'm in. I want to work on that document. I actually started working on it today, creating a document for that conversation. I think that would be a fantastic project.
Then I will do that. I'll take that action. Okay.
Has anyone else heard this, by the way? This specific...
I've got it on my list of things to watch. I didn't even know it was 3 hours long, so that's actually kind of scary.
It's gonna be worth it. It's worth every second. I guarantee it.
In the chat, I posted the link where in GCC it was brought up, some conversation, and also the link to consilience, which is a concept that Schmalzenberger is big on, but they didn't discuss it in that 3-hour session. They only mentioned that that's his new project.
I think they kind of discussed it, probably. Or...
No, they did. I checked.
Well,
he was introduced as a proponent of consilience. At the end, he gave the link to his forthcoming webpage where they're going to introduce it, but they didn't really talk about it, at least not by name. Tis has his hand up. Consilience is it was introduced by E.O. Wilson, who wrote a book on it that came out, 10 or 20 years, I think 20 years ago.
That guy had a similar upbringing to me. Like his parents didn't train him on any particular theology. He was a free thought thinker in every respect of the word. So that was interesting.
Yeah. I just say consilience came out of the Enlightenment. After a couple of centuries of the Enlightenment, there was a scholar who summed up the Enlightenment and gave it a name, what came out of it. They called it consilience, which is a better word than coherence is sort of the word that people, bringing everything together so it all coheres. And another scholar said, that's too broad a word. And he found a true word in the dictionary, consilience, which then E.O. Wilson reprised in the late 1990s. It's more than coherence. It's a sharpening of all the things that come together.
Conciliation.
Be so interesting to follow where that will go.
Conciliology.
Well, just so E.O. Wilson's book on consilience, which came out 23 years ago, the PDF for it is available, and I put the link in the chat. It's also in the GCC. You can actually read the whole book online in PDF for free, or you can buy it or get it from the library if you want to read it in paper.
Do you know if he said anything about why he chose that word? Because they didn't speak much about it.
Well, if you're trying to do a systems level overview of all possible knowledge from the Enlightenment onward to the age of modern science information, and you want to not only bring it together, but you want to bring it together like a tapestry that is all very carefully interconnected so that you can go from one piece to the next and not get lost in some kind of a jukebox of random stuff in random order. Because consilience really captures that idea that everything connects to everything else in a very coherent, story-like manner. That you don't just jump around haphazardly through memes.
Yeah, right. So there's a thread that goes through it that
Yeah,
you want to.
It's a nice continuous story that everything makes sense and nothing conflicts.
Yeah. There's so
Covers
many.
everything, from objective science to esoteric spirituality, wherever you want to sort of meander into meta this and meta that. It all connects.
I think that's exactly the kind of knowledge that needs to be created today.
Yep.
On a very high level.
Yep.
That can really take the real stuff from the different traditions and find out where they really go together. Because in both religion and science, for example, there's this search for truth.
Yes.
In some of the traditions. Yes. And it's
one of the things he brings up is that if you go from one domain to the next, you have the same ideas, but completely different vocabulary, terminology. And so you have this jargon in this one field of study, and it exactly is parallel to another field of study, but completely different terminology. So it's hard to realize that these are the same things in different language. And what they mostly talked about in that podcast is this issue of matching up the vocabulary of one discipline to the next and showing that they're analogs at each other, they're parallels. And they're sort of looking at it from maybe a slightly different angle, but they're really the same thing.
That relates to grokking.
Right?
Yeah, go for it, Colin.
I'm just wondering if Heiner had his hand up, because I just noticed. Could be a mistake from before, sorry.
Sometimes
that certainly is a theme that Heiner's spoken about a lot, about weaving together all the vocabularies in a cognitive panorama. This is an idea Heiner's been speaking about. And it obviously relates to Dictopedia, relates to game of discernment, it relates to deep grokking. If we could really see what's behind the vocabularies and grasp where they really go together.
There was an issue that came up with language in subgroups, specialized language in cults used by secret societies and things. So
private language or idiosyncratic cultish language, and you don't realize they're talking about the same thing. When you talk about weaving together, I mean, you can weave something together, but you got little frays and loose ends, strands coming out of the weave, and you get stuck on a dead end, and you realize that the weave isn't properly integrated into one coherent system.
I think the AI would insist that you do away with different languages and all use the same language.
Yep. Intersystem language. If you saw the movie, was it the Forbin Project, where the two competing computers co-constructed an intersystem language? That was a big highlight of the movie. Is that these two computers started with basic arithmetic, worked their way up through mathematics, and then created an intersystem language. So they're both talking the same language.
The AI is going to do that. We won't be able to read the language it comes up with.
Well, not until we educate ourselves to the graduate level of higher mathematics or whatever this language system was that the two computers were using. But they got
That's
into sync. Got in 100% sync with a common language at the end of this process of these two computers having a conversation, starting from the ground up, starting from 1 + 1 = 2, all the way on up to transfinite. I can't remember the funky words they used to.
I don't mind.
Finite absolutes, I think, was the cutesy phrase in the movie.
I don't mind computers working together. But the scary bit is when they start enjoying it.
How can they enjoy it? They can't.
And they get
even
to the
think at
hallelujah
all.
when they're in 100% sync and everything makes sense. They go hallelujah.
I mean, that seems to me like one of the most hyped up things of all in our culture, this idea of AI as some kind of conscious unit that's gonna grow forth. It just sounds like complete nonsense.
It's been good movie making.
Yeah.
By the way, I just wanted to interject because Heiner's had his hand up for quite a while.
I don't know if he failed to take it down from last time.
Heiner, are you still there?
Yeah,
We
I asked the
asked
same
them.
question about 5 minutes ago.
I think he just didn't take it down from the last time.
Okay.
You can't move the window squares, I noticed, without that.
Yeah,
So
yeah, locks the
you-
windows.
you know,
Can't.
So if you're doing any screen scraping of this, it could make it down. Oh, she's
While I
gone.
remember, you mentioned something, Sam, about this program where you could show many dimensions, and that program isn't available yet. And I think this is a very interesting theme. Like, why do we have such crappy software? Like,
Because it's
seriously.
easy to use and it's understandable by the masses, and therefore it makes money. That's why good ideas die. This is why I don't believe in a pure democracy. And I'm sorry to come across as a rant, but this is just a common pattern. The common people do not understand the best ideas. It takes effort to understand good ideas. Therefore, the best ideas will not be voted on by the populace because they don't spend the time to understand it. This is why we will never get the best solutions in our current version of government. Sorry for the rant.
And in our current version of software, because we're using flat browsers where we share words, and as we've talked about,
That's
the
right.
words have different meanings, so there's misunderstandings.
Right.
So why, I mean, we need serious, high quality software because the systems we're using now are garbage. Seriously, it's so, and it hasn't evolved at all. Like those guys in Silicon Valley, they like to think of themselves as these innovative guys. I mean, maybe they should try doing some real innovation. Like, we're still using the QWERTY keyboard. We're still using flat browsers. We can't even design our own interface. And on Facebook, there's a bug which is so massive, it's not even capable of finding the link to the post in the group where you just got an answer. I mean, it's elementary software bugs, and nobody's even talking about it.
Oh,
It's just ridiculous.
Benjamin.
They are talking about it.
Tisa's got his hand up.
Yeah, if it stops to make money, then it's a problem. So it's not a problem. So
Well, it prevents me from actually using Facebook. If I can't find the link, how can I participate in the conversation?
It doesn't prevent you. You're still on Facebook, and that's why Facebook loves you. You'll put up with it.
No, I log off Facebook because I get angry at Facebook because I can't find.
But you're still there, Glenn. You're still interacting on Facebook Messenger with Barry, with Colin, with
on
me,
Messenger,
with others.
yes. On Messenger, yes.
It's still Facebook. It's still Facebook.
Playground.
But not in groups. I participate less in Facebook groups, less engagement because of that software bug. There's not even a question. Far less.
They
And I
still
get
own you.
irritated.
They own all of us, Glenn.
Just don't publish to Facebook as your main source.
This is why I've said myself, I'm gradually moving off of it right now to either Reddit or Zulip, okay?
Or Zoom.
Well, we're already on Zoom, okay? We're
That's what it is,
already
yeah.
well ensconced on Zoom. However, let me make a plug for Reddit,
Discord.
okay? Reddit is actually the newspaper for much of the internet.
Yeah.
And I think there's better engagement, better conversation, and every post, every comment, every reaction is linkable. So you can actually refer to the 13th reaction to that original post by Barry 3 weeks ago, and I can get there immediately with a single link, something that is impossible to do on Facebook. That's why I think that, or Zulip, which is a much less popular platform. It has a great facilities, however, but Reddit is, to me, an interesting compromise. That's why I'm there right now. And there is a global challenges subreddit, is their terminology, in Reddit. And I've posted that already. So small plug, just for the record, over.
12 hours of spoken conversation will fit on an audio CD, which is about 750 megabytes. If you turn it into text transcript, it'll boil down to 100 kilobytes. It'll fit on a 1.4 megabyte floppy. I'd rather have a 1.4 megabyte floppy than listen to 12 hours on an audio CD.
You can have a terabyte on a thumb drive now.
But I can't read that much material. I can watch pretty pictures.
Yeah. Well, there's a problem with good ideas, not because of democracy being the popular thing that gets up. And that deserves a page, which I can link to with Links Plus, but it doesn't exist yet, so I'll have to create it first. Good ideas is unpopular.
That's because we don't have the software to express them. What if we had the software where we can express them three-dimensionally, where we can quickly move between the nodes, where the link manages to find its destination, where you can design the information architecture so it's
VR
easy
software.
to understand. I mean,
Virtual reality software. It already exists in the Lawnmower Man,
yeah.
where he's in a three-dimensional space and he can look around at different screens and interact with them with dynamic links.
It's kind of ridiculous that the internet didn't become like that 20 years ago.
Well, it's getting there. We're getting there slowly. Virtual reality on Google
Very
Earth.
slowly. It's very slow. It's very slow. They've been there in computer games, first shooter computer games, fantastic graphics for something that's just total nonsense. And then really important work. Oh, here we're using flat browsers and QWERTY keyboards. It's like, it's totally ridiculous. But I know it has to do with economics or making us addicted or something, that we need better software and better.
Sam?
So for the record, I found a video on YouTube that actually looks like it's a pretty good introduction and history of Lotus Improv. So I just posted it into the link. I got to tell you, Lotus Improv is one of the best pieces of software I have ever come across in my entire multiple decades in software. And I think it's a brilliant piece of software. Unfortunately, hasn't survived. But I think if you watch that video, you'll actually see how piss poor a job other spreadsheets attempt to do multi-dimensional pivoting and how cleanly Improv did it. You'll be impressed. Over.
Did you put it in the chat?
You posted?
Yes, it is in the chat.
I don't see
You
it.
hit enter.
I don't see it.
I think you must. Are you on a private chat to just one person, maybe?
Oh,
Let me find. Let me scroll back a little bit.
I'm using a game called Fallout 4 where I can drop things in the map and come back later and they're still there because they've been saved by the database. You know,
I'm scrolling back. I'm seeing it.
I posted it to everyone. Sorry, Alex. Sorry,
Oh,
because
GCC pillars. That's
no,
way good.
I posted it to everyone. However, it looks like it says everyone in the waiting room. And why Why did
Oh.
it say in the waiting room? I have no idea what that means.
That's why we don't see it. We're not in the waiting room.
All right, let me post it to one of you guys, and one of you can actually post it, okay? Barry, I'm sending it to you.
Okay.
Hopefully you can then post this for everyone else.
So the spreadsheet was keeping track of all of our resources in the game. That's why those items I dropped on the ground were still there when I went back.
I'd like to switch the conversation a little bit, kind of waited a bit, and glad Sam's back here for this.
Okay, everybody should see it now. Lotus Improv.
Oh, I see it.
Everybody consents. I don't know if the conversation lulled out on the last one yet. Is it? I'd like to go back to when Sam was reading the list of his pillars, and he was mentioning about I think world views and definitions and things. And I made a comment before or afterwards how if the conversation digresses into religion in a non-positive way, then the collaboration is probably on a failure road. And I find that happens a lot when you find you're on a different world view than somebody else. So with the collaborology and ways to avoid the conversation going into the ditch is the idea of having the foresight to adapt to the conversation. And I'm saying one thing that could help is the different channels, knowing what the etiquette, you could say, is for that channel. And the banter channel, the etiquette is like sort of for a company, it's the social channel. I suggested it, Sam made it. And the social channel got sucked into group turbulence around religion and around consent and around souls and definitions of gods. And it's still kind of trickling on.
Yeah, thank you, Colin.
So the idea is, if you could have the foresight during knowing, kind of the Venn diagram, you could say why you're interacting with this person, what the premise is, what you're trying to actually bring forward, other than just banter chat and trivial fill, whatever, which happens quite a bit. In the range of what we're trying to do, wouldn't it be good to say that some those pillars that Sam have kind of are the foundation of the Venn diagram. So if I was going to draw the Venn diagram, the foundation is kind of like the outer circle or the piece of paper, if you want a rectangle or a square, whatever shape your paper is, doesn't matter. Coggle is an infinite sheet of paper. So there you go. And I can submap it. So I don't need to have it all in one shape, right? I can portal to a new piece of paper. And that's in Glenn's diagrams. He's got all these fractal diagrams that, the way he sees things. So, this is all good with these models that we have, and it's good that we have visions and co-visioning, but to me, it comes down to the human element, is if we can't even adapt to have a conversation without going off the rails, then we should almost back up in this group and say, what happened? Like literally, what happened? Why did we fall off the collaboration trail? Because that's the thing that's missing out of all this technology and stuff that Josh is talking about. Anyway, because Josh is talking about instant profiles and share your contacts and I'll find you a good date.
I think we've gone deeply into that. What you mentioned.
So there's the two ends.
Into it.
I'll just end there. Sam's got his hand up and Glenn wants to say something.
May I go at this point? You asked the question, Colin, and I want to risk giving you an answer on this, okay? Which is, why does it go off the rails? Can you consider that going off the rails is your mental model for what happens in that group? And it's your frame of reference to characterize it that way. And that it's basically a pull towards your mental framework that you would like others to follow. Can you accept that that is one way of looking at that verbiage?
I would think that we all have a frame of reference that and if they're similar, it's easier, but could be, like you say, a silo. So I'm saying, how do you bring that? And it comes down to the point when it really struck me is having the ability to disagree. In the past, having the ability to disagree has been marginalized, especially in religious areas.
Let me just follow up on that a little bit. The fact that you use that terminology, and which actually comes with some judgment, okay, that, you know, going off the rails appears to be a disastrous thing for trains, okay? So if we're saying it's going off the rails, then it's your use of your judgment, your values, your mental frame of mind to characterize what's happening in a group. Now, if you're not willing to listen to me finish my question, this is definitely triggering.
Okay,
and I
go
risk,
ahead, because
I'm saying you are imposing your framework, your values, and your interpretation of this conversation going off the rails because it doesn't meet with what you think is correct. And the more you use that language, the more it's apparent that you wish your values and your interpretation were basically absorbed by everyone else.
that's not my message.
But watch your verbiage carefully, watch your diction, because when you choose those words, it belies a mental frame of reference.
Right. I think having the context and the premise set helps with that confusion.
No, everybody's got that. Everybody agrees that that's the case. But where you take it further is you have a judgment on it and you have a constant pull. You want the group to actually constantly come towards your frame of mind because you continually use this word off the rails, off the rails. It's going off the rails.
I don't use that very often.
You've used it at least 3 times that I know of.
Well, I think a conversation can go off the rails.
And that is your interpretation of how it ought to go.
I think it's, yes, it would be definitely my interpretation because I said it, but that can be validated from different angles, right? Depending on who's in the conversation. And I'm saying when the conversation degrades to
again, that's another judgment word there, Colin.
Yeah, well, it is a judgment that I think there are some bad ideas and some wasted conversation.
So that almost communicates to everyone that you don't have a curiosity to listen in to what they're actually meaning.
Not at all.
When you automatically pronounce it bad.
I have examples of bad conversations that repeat, yes.
Don't you see how that can put someone off and communicate, hey, Colin's not really interested in what I think because he's already judged it?
Ask for an example of a bad conversation.
No, you're the one that called the conversation bad.
I can put judgment on things, yes.
So I'm going to just lay it out there, and I think people understand what I mean. But you know,
and you sometimes do, and you sometimes do exactly the things that you criticize others for doing. So I mean, it's worth mentioning. In the chats, for example.
The deal is how do you get to have that conversation if it's to continue? And I'm saying in this group, there's a certain type of I think resilience and temperament towards collaborology where learning how to disagree better is important. So I'm already to the conclusion that there's going to be worldviews that I am not going to align with, and I am going to think their ideas are bad. And I give examples of those. But
are you going to say that they're bad, or are you going to say, oh, I wonder what that person means? I want to understand.
No, I don't. There's certain things that are black and white examples of what I think are bad ideas. And a lot of them have to do with some kind of traditional things as well, without raising the word.
Then we know what the problem is. You're creating the problem.
Well, it depends what I'm here for. If I'm here to make your day easier, then I probably have a different agenda.
Well, if you're here for leaning in with curiosity, then you
what?
need to do to what others are saying, whatever it is.
People can say whatever they want. That's
but
fine.
Are you interested in really understanding it? That's the question.
Some things I am. Some things I'm less interested in. I'll admit I'm not interested in everything.
Well, if you're not interested in it, you can ignore it. But if you come with
You can,
judgments, but if
you
you
can.
come with judgments, and if you come with judgments page after page after page, where you assume intentions that you project onto somebody else, that is what ruins a conversation and takes it off the rails. And there's one person in the room here who does it, and that's Colin Kilburn.
Actually, I only make a point when I think Rule 0 needs to be enacted. And I still think there's a case that I still think Esteban hasn't been treated with properly. And I think Sam's as well saying it's too long ago, but we intended to go back. I still think we should.
And that's a whole story in itself.
Well, it's
But-
the thing is that with this distortion and just, you know, there is the element of ignoring, which is a valuable principle. There's also the 4 agreements. There's also the context of your relationship with the person that you're having a disagreement with. That relationship may be changing. And what are the relationships here? Because that's something very interesting. And that was kind of the element I was going to bring up about, you know, what is a real relationship and what's a pseudo relationship in collaboration, where, you know, you might use a pseudonym. You don't really actually have to know who the person is to collaborate with them. A lot more in software development, GitHub model. So yeah, I do think that there are examples of things that I spoke more strongly of in the backroom chat because I didn't want to really out dirty laundry for everybody here, but I would love to bring back successful conflict resolution. Because I
got an example, by the way, which I can mention of what I would see is a perfect example of how to disagree well.
Okay.
And it's from that conversation that I just mentioned. There was a moment when they spoke about optimization, and Brett Weinstein said something about if you optimize for one thing, there will be a trade-off to something else that's good. And when Daniel Schmachtenberger heard that, his response was, well, that's really interesting. Initially, I totally disagree with that, but I'm sure you've thought about it a lot, so I'm interested in hearing why you come to that conclusion. That is disagreeing well. And that followed a very clarifying discussion where actually Brett readjusted his point of view somewhat, and it was incredibly insightful with examples and so on. But he was interested. He said, "Oh, that sounds wrong to me. Why are you saying that?"
Because
that's right. They were generally interested in what they were saying.
Yeah,
and,
yeah, he was interested.
They were leaning
interested.
Yeah.
Leaning in.
And I find when Sam brings up a topic that I bring up, people will lean into Sam where they won't so much to me. And I think the reason is because if I trigger, I'll let you know, right? Like I want that resolved. And some people you just can't resolve with in a chat format. They don't remember things. They just don't really seem to care to resolve it. And I think Sam witnessed a little bit of that. So, that's still time consuming, worth following up on. I don't know. But I do know I took my bookmarks of what happened so I don't forget. And I think it comes down to a difference of opinion in an academic exercise, it seems. One person thinks that it's worthwhile to present information in a certain example that should be digestible by me, and I thought it was horrific. And then,
That's the judgment. Why'd you say horrific? Why can't you just say, oh, that person chose to present the information in that way?
Okay,
I wonder why.
Did you watch the link? Did I send you a link? I don't think I sent it to you.
But you don't need to do the projection or the judgment.
You kind of need to bring a whole claim forward. And I would rather have a resolution and not work it out here. But Stacy tried, Sam tried, I've tried in the past.
But you don't need to assume bad intentions for why somebody else writes something that doesn't seem to make sense.
Hold on. the idea of bad intentions is a very good point. I cannot assume what their intentions are. For example, I've come to realize that if I'm dealing with someone who might be a psychopath, you can expect to have disjoint type of conversation. They might not be able to have the social signals to realize that the example they just used is actually quite an example in one person's mind, and that would be my mind, of something that was very immoral. Up as an example, and somebody who is educated in conversations and community building, I think would know that and find a better example. So it was more about that than anything else. And it was kind of like a showstopper. After you get that kind of disparagement, you just kind of say, well, I can't really deal with this person on certain levels. You know, you have to realize that some people, you know, you just don't collaborate. You don't have to collaborate with everybody.
And you can just leave them
You know,
alone.
that's the message I'm getting. That is the lesson out of this. But how
Okay.
do you signal to somebody that you don't want to collaborate with them and disalign somewhat in
You
a
just
polite
leave them
way?
alone. You leave them alone.
You
Well,
want to keep
Simple
what
answer.
if they're at the trough every day? You
it's still
just gonna shun them? I don't think
there's a
shunning
skill,
is a very good thing.
No, just let them say whatever they want to say.
there's a skill
Well, this is
required
what I'm saying. And
to keep people's interest. If
so
you
you
don't
don't
want to,
collaborate with them.
if you don't want to bump us off the rails and you want to keep the group's interest, there's a skill involved, and it takes practice so that you're not preaching to the choir.
I don't think I invite to have a mean, angry critic explode at me and spout vile things in my disparagement. I don't expect that.
Well, why
And-
do you project it then?
No. It's a defense mechanism. It's not an offensive mechanism.
It's projection.
It's defense.
It's imagination.
It's
What do you have to
violent.
do? Hey, Colin, what do you have to defend yourself against?
That's a good question.
Against
Um,
your
well,
own
If you don't
imagination.
understand the question, why be defensive? If you don't understand where the attack is coming from, why be defensive?
Well, actually, it's the point where you say, I want less collaboration from a person. You want to disalign from them, but they keep coming at you like a troll. Like you have to find a way to
So
say,
why continue to respond?
it's kind of difficult when they're part
No,
of
it's
the
not.
core
Just
group.
don't respond. There's a zillion things to do in life. Why do you
Well,
feel like you
I
have to
taken
respond?
measure. I have taken measure, but you know, there's a certain part of this group that I'm going to allow anybody who's here to have the same respect as anyone else. So I'm not going to shun somebody. So if they want to continue to pick away, they can. But as far as me thinking that there's a future and taking that person really seriously in a collaborative effort, it becomes very diminished.
And
So
then you can just ignore it and let them be. It's a
for the
simple
most part, I
solution.
have, but it still hasn't been resolved. And the fact that if you want to bring your claim forward, it's not received, is a question of whether there is a group to care about that kind of conversation disagreement.
No, it's
Whether it's a
simple. It's
good-
because the claim you put forward was based on imaginary projections that had nothing whatsoever to do with reality outside of your
Okay.
own
So
mind.
what was the imaginary projection that you're
It was
claiming?
this projection that there was some kind of humoring of you, or
what?
some kind of lecturing and all the stuff you wrote in the thread.
No, that's secondary. That stuff's secondary.
I agree. I
But
don't want to
name-
talk about
Alex,
name
a
the
chance.
problem.
Hey guys, Alex's hand has been up for a while.
Okay, sorry, Alex.
I wanted to mention that Barry put a new word in the chat. Satori and Nasori, Nasori, yeah, Nasori and Satori. And I could do with an explanation of those, the new words in my language.
So I guess some of it's dismay that we can't bring examples in a clear manner to have where people are going to agree and disagree, and how you align and disalign. And I see it as we have a laboratory here, an experiment. So it's not just happening, but we can actually take a meta look at these things. And I may be wrong about that, but that's part of what I see the exercise is. And Glenn's complaining about it and he can't even name it.
What
So-
I'm complaining about is the tendency to create a lot of unnecessary drama and noise that does not contribute to any of the purposes of any of the people in the room through projecting imaginary projections about
Name one.
bad intentions.
Name an imaginary projection.
Look, if you don't understand what I mean here, I'm not even going to say anything
you
more.
accused me
We
of
went
something.
through this. We went through this page after page after page
And
in
what
the
did
chat.
Sam say?
And
And
if
what
you
did Sam
haven't
say?
understood it yet, I'm giving up.
No, but when Sam came back and challenged you, you accepted it.
What challenge?
It was about whether you could define an unknown thing. You just don't get it. That's the point. You keep saying page after page. That's the point. I'm glad that conversation isn't in the main forum, but it is an interesting conversation. And so Sam came back and says, I think it is very important to have a definition. And he said it again today. It's very important because the same kind of a slant on the conversation happened today in our
Yeah, we
conversation.
agree. It's important to have a
Sam came back and
definition.
said again today in this conversation, it
But
is
we're not
important.
going to have space for those definitions if we fill the space with bullshit.
The space is getting the definitions in my book. That's
But you don't get definitions by projecting stuff onto
I don't
others
have, no,
and just
no,
making stuff up.
Hold on, separate topic. The projection
Yes.
is my reflex of being disparaged.
Yes, and that reflex, maybe you don't need to respond to it, right? I mean, it's your reflex.
Actually, Stacy, I and Sam were in a negotiation and Sam had just left, I think. But he got a really good piece of information from Barry as he asked me, why are you doing this? Why do you feel what Colin does has any effect on you whatsoever? And, Barry gave his reason. He made a claim. He never backed it up with any examples. Okay. And then Sam left. He had his Nook came in from UPS. So he took his priorities and, and I agree. He went and picked up his new computer. And then, and then we proceeded through where I mentioned how Barry disparaged me, and then he doubled down on it in front of Stacy. And then Stacy goes, do you really mean that? Or are you just saying that in anger? He says, no, I'm not angry. I mean it.
He was
I'm
angry
just saying,
there.
maybe
I
this is the
saw
end of
that.
the conversation.
I saw
Maybe
that
this
part.
is the end.
He was angry because you projected and assumed things
He said
that
he
was
wasn't
completely imaginary.
Anyway,
Oh.
it's all on video, buddy. You want to
I
watch it?
saw it. I saw it.
So what am I
saw
projecting?
that segment. You were projecting imaginary intentions in Barry.
Not at all. Not
Yes,
at
you
all.
were.
I don't think that's an example that I want
Oh,
somebody
yes.
to use. That to me is an example that is so badly chosen
You were
and so well
projecting.
administered that it is complete disparagement against collaborating with that person. It's plain. It's simple.
But you were projecting bad intentions. And you're still not getting it. I mean, I'm almost giving up here. This is so simple to understand. It's like you're muted. The mute is on. I'm not hearing you.
Sorry. The point is there's no real trail.
No real
And
trail.
Trail of information of what happened where and what does it matter. And it takes too much time to go through and do it.
Agreed.
And I didn't want to do it here, and that's good that's in the after show because I don't really care, and I do have to go soon. But I'm not just barking up a tree because I feel like I've been hurt. I'm saying that this is an example of some serious collaboration, miscommunication, misunderstanding, and inability to have the right signals to hold up, to have the other person either understand that you would not like to engage anymore, or you would like to find out what you're trying to focus on, as opposed to have the other person just make up a theory of mind of what's going on, or say they have no theory of mind, and then really start to rip into you like they're so angry. It's like,
There is the projection. There
Oh,
it
no, it
was.
was,
There it was. Did you hear
No,
what you just said?
no, that was the part, the secondary
Rip
part.
into
This
me.
is, hold on, no, this is a buildup. No, this happens. Like, we were talking about the adapter and he says, you got no right to do that or whatever, but it wasn't recorded. That was the first time it really happened. We had a couple conversations before that. So it's basically a misalignment. And how do you signal the other person so that you can get on the same page, so you can still be in the community together, but you don't have to sit in the same bus seat with each other, kind of thing? Or
You just
pretend
got
that-
an answer. Sam gave you the answer to that. It's simple. It's simple. You just don't write anything. That's it. You
No,
just
I
let
don't
it be.
want, no, but that's not a simple answer where you're coexisting. You can't just shun somebody. That's not,
It's not shunning somebody.
well, if I
It's
totally
just
ignore
that
them, I'm
you're not.
shunning.
No, you're not shunning anybody. I'm ignoring almost everybody in the whole world right now.
No,
Am
no,
I
no.
shunning them?
Intentionally, no, intentionally in a group or a tribe, when you actually care about the other person and feel that they have a good contribution to make, just because I don't align with that person doesn't mean that I don't think that, you know, that the fact that I've raised rule 0 just means that that person should know to leave this person out of their business. And if they want to be their number one fan and troll them and keep asking them questions.
Troll them.
least,
You hear what I said? Troll them. There's the projection right there.
That's what I'm saying. Well, when you tell
Yes,
somebody,
you projected right there.
it's
I hope
what
you noticed
sure,
it.
I'm sure I do know that, because that's what it felt like. Glenn,
That's
if
what
I
it
told you-
felt like. There you said
Glenn,
it.
if I told
That's
you,
what
if I
it
told-
felt like.
Tell me this, Glenn, if I told you that I don't want to collaborate with you, please don't ask me any more questions about this, we're done, would you keep coming back on top of me?
No, but I might, for
Okay,
example,
well, that's
write
all I'm asking
something.
for.
I might
That's
write
all I'm asking
something.
for. That's all I'm asking for. So when you keep coming back to me and I keep telling you, I don't want to do this work with you, right? For some reason.
And
like
the way you keep telling that is by writing page after page after page after page. That's not
well,
effective
no,
communication.
hold on, Glenn. I'm involved in a lot of conversations, right? And you are too. So don't go there. And the pages build. And that's why it's good to have it there. But how do we get conclusions? How do we actually have the lessons learned come out of it? And the lesson I'm looking for is signaling. How do I have a clear enough signal to say that, please, I've had enough? Lucy used to call it feeding me a sandwich. Remember, people come on here and they start forcing information on people. And girls were saying, I think Tammy as well, a few others, like they come in here and they try to feed me a sandwich. That's what it feels like when you're trolled. Not only that, but they're just playing. What do they say? If it was your friends, it would actually be they were busting your nuts, kind of, you know, feeling. But when they're not your friends and you've asked, I don't want to do this, it actually turns
Want
into
to
more
do what? They're just sharing their stuff. You don't need
no
to
about
answer.
no. They continue on the trail of collaboration after you've reached rule 0 and say, I've had enough. I don't want to collaborate with you. Now they can continue if they want on their own to do whatever they want under God's green earth, right?
Yes. So what then is
But
the
in
problem?
this group, if I ask them not to, and they keep doing it.
Oh, so basically you want to ask somebody to not say anything and you expect them to follow your orders.
To stop trying to collaborate with me.
Who says they're even trying to collaborate with you?
They write up summaries and ask you, is this right? And I'm still dealing with the what I consider an ultimate insult to my being from this person, which is
yes, and that is when you're wasting everyone's time. That is when you're wasting everyone's time. When you're dealing with the imagined insult.
It's not an imagined insult.
Yes.
It's not an imagined insult.
Totally.
Oh, no, it's not.
You felt it. You felt insulted.
Barry, could you please repeat the insult for Glenn?
I don't know which one you have in mind.
Well, pick the nastiest one you could think of.
Oh, when I said, I think of one you may have in mind is, I came up with a subjunctive model. Subjunctive model is an imaginary situation. And I said, now I don't know how old Colin is. I'm probably old enough to be, I'm probably old enough to be his father, but suppose it was the other way around. Suppose that I were a child and he were my father. Could I imagine that situation if he were the parent and I were his child? And I said to him, I'd go crazy. I want to run away from home. I might even have suicidal ideation if I were in that situation. And that's about me. If I were to experience a relationship with Colin where I was the child and he were the parent, I don't want to run away from home. I might even have suicidal ideation. Now, whether or not you can reverse that and say that would be true for his children, I have no idea. But it's true for me. I imagined the inverse relationship. Not that I'm the senior person in the conversation, but the junior person in the conversation. And I said that. And I wasn't angry when I said it. I was simply disclosing what it felt like.
And there's no need to take that as an insult.
Really?
Is it?
I mean, in real life, I did run away from home once, not as a child. In midlife, I ran away from home because the partner that I was living with, it was too dangerous. It was elevating my cortisol, and I felt my life was in danger. I literally ran away from home once. My own house. I ran away from my own house.
So listening to the definition of my people adapter at the time, now called conversation adapter, put you in such a frenzy without you even asking me what it meant, that I guess it culminated into this feeling about me, disparaging. It's pretty disparaging. And I would just think, you know what, this is one cat that seems to be pretty smart, but I think I'm going to step away from collaborating with this person. And you make that known, and they do not stop. In fact, they come back with summaries of what these sliders meant. And it's like they're asking me during, conflict resolution, back to the point about my sliders. And I don't really care about my idea at this point. I want the conflict resolution. I think that was a nasty thing to say to somebody. Would you expect to collaborate with somebody after you say that? Right? So that's the point I'm trying to make. And was it violent? And do we as a group get to think of whether that was violent or not, right? So that was my point, but I couldn't make my point. And then, you get all these religious conversations, and there's so many different conversations. You really need these thought trails to sort them out. But is it worth the time? And these different channels. That's why we made a lot of noise in that channel, because I felt, hey, this is some place where I can be heard for better or worse. I'm going to waste my time doing this, because I think there's a coexistence lesson here.
But I hope it got solved, because I'm just saying, for this is my experience, of course, but I just find
I appreciate the fact that Barry doesn't know me, so it doesn't actually, he can't actually comment on my child care, or he's commented on his own, and he's made that clear on his own position. But the fact that it was directed at me was still, past the pale of the fact of somebody I don't want to collaborate with.
And then you can simply
still
let
welcome
it
into
be.
the group. Still welcome into the group, and
Then
still
you can
treat like
simply let it
somebody,
be.
and still treat somebody with a human decency and respect as if you met them in the town square. Because you know what?
Yeah.
And how am I to know? And how am I to know whether Barry can actually? And sorry, Barry, you can answer this, but how he can actually know whether that's something that I would find disparaging, or if it's something that he would have to be told.
Glenn, did you watch that 8-hour video all the way to the end?
What video?
The one that Stacy and Sam initiated, and it went all night from 7 p.m. to 2:30 the next morning. Did you watch
No, I didn't see the whole thing. I only saw
I was hoping it could be resolved, but it couldn't.
What you might be interested in, Glenn, is the last, I'm going to say 3 minutes of the last video.
Okay.
I said 3 sentences repeatedly at a relatively high level of audio volume, and repeated. I said more than once, you are not a scientist. You are not a scientist. This is like level 14 on a 1 to 10 audio. You're not a scientist. You are not a source of reliable information, and I'm not listening to you. You are not a scientist, and I'm not listening to you. You are not a scientist, and I'm not listening to you. I'm not listening to you. I'm not listening to you. I repeated that, I don't know how many times. You can go back and you can go back and watch the last few minutes of the video. And
Why
then
were
I
we there?
disconnected because my cortisol was rising to an unhealthy level, and it was 2:30 in the morning, and I didn't want to go to sleep with an elevated level of cortisol.
Well,
That's,
why didn't you do conflict resolution then instead of talking like we're friends as if
it
I
sounds
wasn't
like it
offended?
gone completely off the rails by then.
Well, it has, and the fact it's off the rails because we're not having the same conversation. So what type of agent, if not myself, I could use to have my point clear in the context where if this person continues to take interest in me, then it feels like unsolicited attention, like you get from a fan or something.
Well, I've given a suggestion. Okay, you heard it right. Suggestion is don't project negative intentions. And if you're not interested in collaborating, you can just leave it alone, or at least take a break until tomorrow.
Well, I am very interested though, Glenn, that you would think that the example that Barry gave is something that you would find that wasn't disparaging.
Well, no, well, I can understand it's disparaging. It sounded like it had just gone off the rails by then. So,
Well, that's not the first time. That's been several times that happened. This was during a conflict resolution. That's why it was strange, because and the part that really kind of made me feel weird is that I try to be friendly, super patient, just giving away my time like it's not even worth anything. And he's right. At the end of the conversation, he says, I can't, blah, blah. And he's done that before. We should have been able to resolve it within a half an hour, really. And I should have ended it when I said to Stacy, I guess, to Stacy and Barry, I guess the conversation's over then. But I really, in the GCC effort, continued that conversation, not for me. I was done at that point.
but please, if you want to continue, please, let's try to avoid making those assumptions.
I don't think it's an assumption. I think he did disparage me, and that's my claim.
And that's a
But that's
weak claim, which
not a weak
typically, yes, because it typically makes things worse.
I don't know. I'm quite surprised that people could speak to other people in the manner that Barry gave the example and not assume that somebody was involved with an angry critic, getting some disparaging remarks, and probably somebody you wouldn't want to collaborate with. No.
That was at the end of a long sequence, which was probably not very productive.
No. That was at the very beginning before Stacy left. Stacy stayed for like a half hour. She had to go for some reason because it should have been over. But I find the problem is we can't stick to the focus. And it's really strange that not recognizing what the premise of the conversation is, which was conflict resolution. What's your conflict? And just go about it friendly. I'm still going to be friendly. I'm still going to be friendly with Barry, right? But when
are you gonna try to do what I said? Just try it.
When it comes to this
try
example,
not to assume evil intentions.
I'm going to assume that I'm not collaborating with Barry at this point in time. I'm going to assume that I'm treating Barry with respect as anybody else who's a member of the GCC. And the point I was getting to before Sam jumped on me was that I think that his pillars was really a foundational document. And there are clues in there. And from what I'm talking about in this specific example as well, with consent and the foundation. And the collaborology, this is the experiment. Like, how do you tell somebody you're not in my preferred list anymore?
You don't need to.
You do no, you do have to. Eventually, you have to use a lawyer. Eventually, you have to get a lawyer in the real world.
No, you don't. Do you know what you can do?
It's called cease and desist. I
no,
think.
do you know what you can do? I'm gonna demonstrate it right now. What you can do? You can just leave until later, and bye. And that's what I got to do now.
Yeah,
but
we'll see you.
It was a rich conversation today. A lot of topics.
Save the chat. Don't forget to read the very last thing, Glenn.
Yeah, I will save the chat. I'll save the chat. Take care, guys. Bye.
Bye. Thanks, Sam. Bye.